Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is Thursday. It is Thursday, May 7th, 2020. How are you doing? I hope you're doing good. Are you ready for the weekend? I am ready for the weekend. This guy is ready for the weekend. I've got some guests with me today. Let me bring them on. I have got Daniel Reynoso. Good morning, Daniel. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And Daniel's been on the show before. He'll be on the show again tomorrow, mañana. And then we also have Justin, the Daily Atheist. Justin, the Empathetic Atheist, on the show again. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning.
Thank you guys for joining me. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Justin has his own show, and I'm going to put some links, or there's actually links to these gentlemen down there. And then I've got two more guests who are going to be here at 11 a.m. Eastern. And I'm going to, I kind of screwed up. I'll have to put their links in the description after the show because I was going to do two streams and that got too complicated. So we'll figure it out. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
And of course, we just covered how you just woke up.
You can tell, right? I'm not one to dress up for the camera. I just, on the West Coast here, I was like, oh man, my alarm went off 5:30. Let's get going. Let's get cracking. So
there you go. Time
there
to
we
wake
are.
up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit of an early bird, so I sit here for 2 hours before the show, getting ready, doing things. You'd think I'd be better prepared. Let me just make sure. Can everybody hear us today? Can you see us today? Yesterday, I ran the show. I introduced everybody. Oh, man, it was awesome. I was like, this is this amazing person. Slices, dices. It makes julienne French fries. It was wonderful. The introduction was just, and I look over 5 minutes into it, people are like, we can't see nothing. Has the show started? I'm like, damn it.
I saw that.
Yeah. There was some kind of, not to go techie on everybody, but if you're familiar with like all this stuff, whenever I created the show the day before, for some reason in YouTube, it had actually 3 shows, one with the thumbnail and 2 others that appeared to be blank. And other than that, everything seemed to work. And whenever I hit the stream button, I thought we were streaming, but it didn't do the thing at the play. So, but it worked whenever we got it. So,
wow.
Ta-da.
Glad it worked out. For sure.
Drama. So, let me pop up here. Daniel, you gave me a list of things that you were particularly keen on talking about. One of them was the New Testament stuff. Let me pull some of that up. I want to get some topics up.
And anything that you guys want to discuss.
Absolutely.
Everything from what it's like to bartend in Southern California or New Orleans. I bartended in New Orleans for a year. I've lived in the DC area. I've done a few different things, but I definitely want to make sure that anything that I offer is of benefit to your viewers in the community.
Well, I'm sure several of my viewers would probably enjoy some bartending tips.
Yeah, well,
you're going to hell. You know that, right? You're going to hell for all that drinking. Anyway, some of them would probably.
They got a great bar.
Great bar.
Hell has to have a great bar.
Absolutely. Let me just check some stuff here. I want to say hi to everybody in the chat. I forgot. I'm sorry, guys. I'm a bad person. Galen Thurber. I hope I say that right. Galen Thurber. That's a cool kind of name. Galen. Good morning, Galen. Brainbug is here. My favoriteest Brainbug in the entire universe. There are many, but there's only one that comes and watches my show, and that's the Brainbug. Kristen, best name ever. Native Atheist. Hey, brother. How you doing? Kristen. Kristen's here. Epileptic Skeptic is here. We've got lots of folks. I saw Uri Bench. Good morning, Uri Bench. Grumpy Old Dude. And I saw Julie LaVoice in there this morning. So good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I got these guys. Ha, ha, ha. So, Justin, how's your show going? Or either one of you. Y'all just take over. I got shit.
Go for it, Justin.
Yeah, it's going good. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, and I always have somebody on to have a good discussion with. Most of the time, it's a theist, and then I have an after party afterwards, so we can bring 4 other people into the chat, and we'll have a good dialogue, good discussion. It's going good. I have plenty of viewers that watch it live, and then I get some people that watch it afterwards, just due to time constraints. I mean, for example, Best Name tries to catch my shows, but it's like umpteen hours in the morning for her, and it's hard for her to listen. So I'm glad for the people that can't catch it right then and there. They're able to do it afterwards. But yeah, everything's going great. People really like the content that I'm putting out and the discussions that I'm having. Tonight I'll be having, if anybody knows, I'll be having Richard Mattson on my show. And that is a definitely a good person to talk to, especially for Daniel. I think you would have a really good conversation with him.
Yeah.
Him and Daniel could go for hours.
Man, if Richard was to show up anytime soon, I'd throw him in there and let you guys just talk. Because man, Richard's got some very interesting views.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know who he is. What are some of the things that he likes to talk about?
You know what?
Well, you know him better than I do, Chris.
Are you sure? I was going to let you field this one. I dare not speak for Richard, but but all I can say is I really don't understand his beliefs. He is a theist. There may or may not be aliens involved. I don't know. He does. He believes Christian doctrine is incorrect, but he seems to be very well versed in the Bible.
Interesting.
So and I got to be honest here with you. I mean, I hope he's not watching this. To go right to his head. He's actually a fun guy. I enjoyed talking to him. I don't agree with him. I certainly wouldn't want to help him propagate his crazy. I got my own crazy to propagate,
right.
but man, he's so much fun to talk to.
Hey, sounds interesting. So he's going to be on your show tonight, Justin?
Yes, he's going to. He was actually on my after party on Tuesday. And I had another guy. His name was Jonathan, and he used to be a white nationalist and a neo-Nazi and all kinds of bad, horrible stuff. And then apparently he found Jesus, and it saved him. So I was trying to run that slippery slope and that edgy line of trying to talk to him about his beliefs, but also not trying to, deconvert him to make him go back to being a shitty person.
Right. Yeah. But, like telling the drug addict, it's, just go find a needle,
right.
Get off this Jesus kick, get yourself a needle again. Yeah, no.
Exactly.
That is a hard balance for sure.
Yeah.
It definitely is.
In my experiences like that, it's me going, you had that power. You did that, not that. So don't fall back into that, because you have that power and you've got the strength to continue going on, as opposed to, there's no angels and God there protecting you, so you may as well go back to hitting that. Obviously
that's kind of exactly what I did too. I kind of went back to telling him I used to have a bad drug problem, and I was able to get over that without any help. And I know not everybody can do that, but I was able to get over it without any help, without any hospitalizations, and without God. I was able to do it all by myself. So I told him, I was like, give credit where credit's due. I mean, you got out of this stuff. I believe that it was the community that you were part of, but the community, I don't believe that it was God that got you out of that. I believe that it was good people trying to do good things for you, and there's nothing divine about that.
That's true.
But yeah, we were talking, and we had Richard there in the after party, and he was kind of quiet for a while. He just had his his mic muted, and he just kind of sat there and just absorbed everything that Jonathan was saying. And once I was like, Richard, you've been quiet. Go ahead and open up those floodgates. He respectfully, very respectfully, came at Jonathan, just like with all these different questions, and Jonathan was having to sit there, and I was quite confused, because I messaged Wes in the private chat, because I had my right hand man Wes on there, and cool, I was like, he is a theist, right? Because he's totally arguing like an atheist right now. And he was like, yeah, he's a theist, and he believes in some type of alien theory or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I was like, wow. But yeah, I believe that Daniel, if you were, just say, I know you have a family and you have kids and whatnot, but if you were to get on that tell me tonight, hey, let me get on the after party, I think you and Richard would just go back and forth. You guys would be an ongoing game of ping pong.
We may have to invite Richard for tomorrow.
There you go. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be a hit.
And I'll let you know if I can carve out some time tonight too, Justin. I appreciate the invite. Now.
Yeah, not a problem.
Speaking of which, how did your debate with Pastor Taylor go?
It went well. There were theists in the chat that halfway through the debate, before we even got to the cross-examination, were saying, yeah, the atheist already has this one in the bag. So that felt good.
Good, man. Good. Yeah. He's an interesting guy. I definitely it's, anybody who is willing to engage, I think, at that level is, already, to me, has some brownie points. You know what I mean? Most people aren't trying to reason that thing out, So the fact that he gives it his full attempt, is really interesting. But
I like how he's respectful on my show. He's been on every single one of my after parties. And Chris, if you decide to ever have another theist on the show, I mean, he would be a great fit. He's got a little bit of a fundamentalist view. He's a hellfire preacher. He's young Earth creationist. So he's everything that we're not, but he is very respectful.
Well, but so actually, Brainbug pointed that out and recommended that I have him on the show. I've had one Christian on the show besides Richard. Richard Manson. I've had one Christian that sort of didn't go well, sort of went well. I've decided that going forward, if a Christian is going to be on my show, they need to gotta know that I ain't pulling no punches. I'm just going to be me and not try. Because when I get them on my show, I try to be real gentle and real kind. I try to be a good host. I'm a good host to atheists. But to get the bad people, forgive me for saying that, on the show and not treat them like bad people and not ask them the hard questions is not really fair to my people. Yeah. So if they're going to be on my show, if Pastor James Taylor, Pastor Taylor is going to be on the show, that's great. He just needs to know that if it comes up, I'm absolutely going to challenge. I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm just going to go ranty Chris. And
I think he'd be willing to accept those terms if I've had my experience with Pastor Taylor.
I generally try to be polite. My voice may go up. I get loud and I wave my hands a lot. I point sometimes. I call names, but other than that, I'm polite.
Both of you are very hospitable.
And that was part of the problem last time. I feel probably too hospitable. To be honest, I just wanted to know what the guy thought. What's your craziness? Tell me. I didn't want to interrupt him every time he told me about something and try to correct him or debate him with it. I wanted him to finish telling me, and then we got to talking. That was kind of fun.
I'm of the same mind. I can't understand when people, get so angry or turned off by the fact that I'm asking questions because I respect you enough to want to know more about how you think and why you think the things you do. And there are a lot of people out there that just really don't want to answer those questions. They shut down, they get angry. If you ask them to think anything, beyond the basic stuff of what it is that they think, why this, or how does this connect to this, or didn't you say that, and how do you reconcile these two beliefs? They just don't want to talk about it anymore. And not just that, but they get angry. And I've never really understood that, because I feel like I actually am showing you more respect by wanting to know how it all connects, instead of, shying away. But, oh, that's great. I'm glad you believe all these, contradictory things dancing around in your head. Have a great day. It just doesn't make sense to me. I want to know. How does it connect? How do you make sense of this stuff? You know what I mean? But most people, I don't think, make sense of it. Most people are just happy to, hold a view that makes them feel a certain way, powerful, good, whatever it is, and then jump to another view. And I think this, and I think that. And, that's fine, to have a potpourri of beliefs that you kind of dig into. But again, for me, method matters. You know what I mean? I want to know, how did you get to this? What does it mean? Well, what do you mean by this word? What do you mean by this association? And I think people just get exhausted with that. Most people aren't looking to defend their beliefs or, endure cross-examination. But ever since I was real young, I've always been into cross-examining beliefs and, how does this make sense? You know what I mean? And, so I guess I have I'm a particular taste for a lot of people. Some people just don't want to do it, and we leave it there. Other people happy to engage. So
I have this really bad habit of attacking the foundations. Going for the absolute foundations of what you believe. Oh, you're a Christian. Well, let's talk about Abraham. Oh, you don't talk about it? Why don't you want to talk about Abraham? If you don't want to talk about Abraham, let's talk about Noah. Let's talk about Cain. Let's talk about these things. And they don't want to talk about them because they're all horrific.
Absolutely right.
And that's where I go right from the beginning. I don't even have. That's only because those are the parts of the things that I know. As I get moving forward in my experience, and the wife actually suggests, and this may happen very soon, I may start taking college classes and go for a degree in theology.
Nice.
And psychology.
That's a good mix.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what we've been threatening to do. Anyway, so what was I talking about? I lost it.
Yeah, about tearing down systems of belief, or at least going to the
Yes,
foundations. Yeah.
I go to their beginnings, and then but part of the deal is I'm not familiar enough with Christianity. Not with Christianity, I was a Christian. I'm not familiar with the New Testament enough because I haven't been studying it. I've been studying. I started at the beginning of the Bible and working on there, so I need to carve out a little bit of time and examine those particular texts, because I mean I know some things about them, and whenever I get to talking to a Christian, I'm like, well, what about this, and 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 and then it comes to context and metaphor, and then they're just like, fuck you, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
You're going to hell.
A lot of times the issue that I get is that I'll talk about Abraham and I'll talk about Moses and Exodus and the whole works. And they're like, but you realize that you atheists just keep going back to the Old Testament. And I was like, all right, let's focus on the New Testament, because if you don't have a resurrection, then you don't have shit.
Yep.
So I go right to the resurrection, and I'm like, all right, so which one of these 4 gospels got it right? And I kind of went into that in my debate with Pastor Taylor. I was like, which one got it right? And he sent me a link to where all of them were just from different perspectives from different people at different times. And I was like, but one of them, they showed up and the block wasn't moved, and they went inside and there was nothing in there. And then they went, and then Mary, the same person, went inside and there was a man sitting in there. So did she visit this thing for the first time? This tomb for the first time, multiple times now. See, you have these stories, and there's parts of these stories that are mutually exclusive. You can't.
That's
you
right.
can't use them both. I think the best part of my debate was a conversation that theists and I get into a lot, and it comes down to faith. At the very beginning, he defined faith. I asked him what he defined faith as, and he defined it as trust and confidence. And then he used faith in the Hebrews 11 text differently afterwards. So within the cross-examination, I said, hey, so you believe this, so you believe the Bible, and you have to presuppose and have faith that God exists because you don't have any evidence for that currently. And he's like, yes. And I was like, so that does not sum up to your original description of faith, which was trust and confidence with evidence. I said, you just said you had faith without evidence, so now your position is contradictory. And I think that was a good point to where I kind of cornered him into a place to where he was the one that spoke his own answers. That's why I don't like people that, I don't like it when an atheist will say, well, you believe in this and you believe in that. No, let that person dig their own grave. Let that person dig their own hole, because later on you can use a tie back and say, remember when you said this? Now you're saying this now. And sometimes they can justify it with whatever they try to, and sometimes they can't. And I think that was a good point in the debate, to where he couldn't justify, going from trust and confidence with evidence to blind faith.
And that's always the sleight of hand, sleight of mind that takes place with most faith believers in any position, because really, we, as atheists, we tend to focus on the God question, or organized religion, or Christian revelation, or whatever it is, these particular projects. But ultimately, it's a faulty way of reasoning that we're really getting to the bottom of. And I think that when you define it that way, Justin, in terms of how do you define faith? And the problem is that faith is so many different things to so many different people, and it encompasses a large amount of different kinds of, feelings, reactions, pathos. So for somebody might use the word faith in terms of trust. I have faith that I trust that this is going to happen, or that I'm going to pull through, or that my dad's going to, recover in the hospital, or whatever it is that you trust to be the case. But the problem, and that's fine, I have no problem with people that want to use faith in terms of, some kind of trust that they have in something that they can admit that they don't know. That's fine. But, for me, I think we really get into problems, as I think we've talked about last time. Peter Boghossian in A Manual for Creating Atheists talks about the problem comes into play when people try to use faith as an epistemology, as a method for knowing. And I think when we're saying that we know something by faith, that's a contradiction in terms. You can't know things by faith. But unfortunately, that's precisely what the author of Hebrews does in chapter 11. He makes the claim that, again, starting from verse 1, he says, now faith is the evidence of that which is hoped for, the substance of that which is not seen. And he goes on to say that by faith we know that the world was created by the word of God. And he goes, and it's a long explanation throughout the chapter about all these great heroes of faith that did great things and knew great things in the Old Testament because they have this great faith. But the very definition of faith at the beginning of the chapter is problematic because the author, the anonymous author, by the way, we don't know who this author was, but he makes the claim that faith is the evidence of that which is hoped for. So what he's saying is that your deep conviction in a particular idea, the fact that you believe it, so you have this deep-seated conviction, that is its own evidence for the thing that you hope to be true. And that doesn't work. All that ultimately does is lock you into a circular reasoning way of approaching any subject. Because if you can defer to your own personal inner conviction as the evidence for something being true, then there's nothing that's off limits. Anything can be true according to that criteria, and so it's ultimately not fair. And anything, ultimately, I think it comes down to a case of special pleading, that, this Christian revelation has been around for so long. How can so many people be wrong? Obviously, this is, this has something to it. I don't think so. I think that for the most part, we've been the unwitting victims of a long con in some senses. We're only finally beginning to come to our senses in the last 150 years or so. Beginning with, I guess one of the major figures to really start unraveling this for us was Julius Wellhausen. The Wellhausen hypothesis, the documentary hypothesis, as it's known. The documentary hypothesis was the initial attempt to show that Moses was not the actual author of the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Torah, right? Or the Pentateuch in Greek. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy have traditionally been ascribed to Moses as the author, including the revelation about his own death. It's recorded, and there are people who believe that God simply revealed this to Moses and he wrote it all. You know what I mean? But Julius Wellhausen, back in I think it's 1876 or something like that, forms this hypothesis called the Wellhausen hypothesis, or the documentary hypothesis, showing that there were actually different strands of authorities that put this into play. And in other words, that different editors, different groups edited and formed these texts from different inspirations and for different purposes and things like that. And I think that really got the ball rolling, you know what I mean, in terms of tearing the Bible apart and really looking at it from a set of scientific lenses and academic lenses, as opposed to a devotional reading of those texts, So I think that once, and now we're off and running at this, 2020. I think we know more about these writings, the anthology of the Bible. We know more about these writings and the history of these writings and the cultures and the communities that made them up than anybody at the time writing it. You know what I mean? Because the whole trick, right? The whole game is to make it seem like it's all a uniform message. It all comes from one single source, and that this source is beyond reproach, and we have no right to question it. And I think now that we've actually become comfortable with questioning these kinds of things, we've learned quite a bit, and I think that we're on the right road there. We need to keep on plugging, and let's not cower before any false gods, any false approaches. Let's treat the Bible, the writings of the Bible, like we would any other work that we want to get to know. I don't know if you guys know, but there's a huge question in classical scholarship about whether or not there was a real, literal, historical Homer who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Was there really one Homer? Is this a single author? And etc. And people fall all along the spectrum with this. You know what I mean? But the point is ultimately that if we're going to treat any work critically, I think what there's no better work to treat critically than the anthology of the writings of the Bible. If we're really going to make the claim that these writings have some kind of special priority in our lives, or how many people think it's the word of God, that there's this meta-narrative that comes out of the Bible that gives us, a path for salvation, that we should really, put our thinking hats on, and put on our thinking caps, put on our skeptical goggles, and really get to the bottom of what do we mean by these statements? What are these writings telling us? And I think once we start to do that, like you said, Chris, you start asking the hard questions, and most people don't want to do that. They want to just know that they're saved, that everything's okay, that mom and dad or grandma and grandpa are in heaven waiting for them, or whatever good feelings are evoked by the message. And unfortunately, that's just not the way we do business these days. These days we tend to come a little harder, and I think that's good. And I think we need to come even harder on the writings of the Bible, and let's get to the bottom of it. There's a good book called The Bible Unearthed, and it's a look at the history of the Old Testament as it's portrayed in the Old Testament versus what archaeology has to say about it. And there's quite a bit of disparity there, you know. And I think that if we're going to side with anything, it's going to be the science. It's not going to be the self-serving text written by priests who wanted to control people. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You know what I mean? The only people I think who would disagree with that are people who want to save their faith claims out of special pleading. You know what I mean? That's all I can see. You know. So
I personally, I know of a lot of people like faith. They think that faith is a good thing. I see faith as a tool of the weak-minded. It's like a crutch. Faith kills. I have a series of videos called Faith Kills, where I talk about people who have used their faith instead of the real magic that's out there, science, to kill their kid by not giving them medicine, or to kill themselves by not taking their own medicine, you know, or whatever. Yeah, I'm all about faith killing people. And I have a second series I'm going to start working on about how they'll harm other people or themselves. Because there's two different, I know it sounds the same, but it's one thing being able to harm somebody else for your faith. It's another thing to harm yourself for your faith. So yeah, me and faith don't work well together.
No, you know, you're right. And I think it was, you know, Sam Harris back in, I think it was 03 or 05. I think it was 03, after the 9/11 attacks. Sam Harris publishes a book called The End of Faith. And he was really one of the first people to, you know, throw down the gauntlet and talk about the damaging effects of faith, because faith is often, as you've already rightly pointed out, you know, it's often lauded as some kind of good thing for people to have. And I can definitely see how for a lot of people, this kind of intrinsic hope, you know, this intrinsic hope keeps them going, or, you know, this kind of idea that life means a certain thing for me, so I can kind of get through my day and feel better about myself and whatever, you know. I get that, but ultimately, you're right, Chris. Faith is a very harmful tool.
Well, right now we have people going, my faith is going to protect me from this virus.
You know, yeah,
and then they get the virus, they take it to other people, and it may not hurt them, but you know, I mean, this is it's irresponsible and dangerous. They
didn't watch Kenneth Copeland's The Wind of God.
He was killing everyone, man. Yeah, blowing that out. You know,
yeah.
No, but that's exactly right, Chris. You know, I mean, and that's, you know, I think there comes that's a very poignant example for me, exactly, because, you know, if all the memes going around, you know, we don't see any faith healers, you know, we're the faith healers for coronavirus, etc. Or I don't need to wash my hands, I'm washing the blood of Jesus, and, you know, all these little pithy, you know, kind of sayings. But the fact of the matter is that you're living in la la land.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, with something like this current virus going around, this is the hard and fast of the real world. Most faith, you know, dispositions don't get to meet this kind of challenge, and I think that, you know, when there's nothing on the line, when you have no skin in the game, it's easy to talk about all the things that you believe. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, I believe this, I believe that. It doesn't cost you anything. There's no transactional cost. But when you got to put your money where your mouth is and say that you continue to believe this, and then the real world crashes in on those beliefs, you're forced suddenly to start rethinking what it is that you mean by believing something. So just to give you an example, the Great Disappointment. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Great Disappointment, but a forerunner of Jehovah's Witness, you know, theology. It was the forerunners, the Millerites, believed that the world was coming to an end back in 1844, and people sold all their property, and they you know, they quit school, and they quit life. They basically went to this hillside to await the day that Jesus was supposed to come back. And of course, no Jesus, no show, right? You know, he's been MIA for a long time. And, you know, so he doesn't come back. And this event is known as the Great Disappointment. And some people were disillusioned, but a lot of people weren't. Even though Jesus did not come back, all of a sudden a new type of explanation had to take hold as to what really happened. So some people believe that, oh, he really did come back, but he came back invisibly in the sky to rule over, you know, his kingdom invisibly in the sky. So that's just it, is that faith starts backpedaling. You know, it's instead of dealing with the issues as they stand before our ability to recognize and our ability to cross-reference and, you know, and put to the test, it backpedals and it couches itself deeper into its own cocoon of, you know, of non-explanation, you know, explanations that are not explanations. In other words, you've got to add more mystical layers in order to keep this faith ball going. You know what I mean? And this goes to something that there's a philosopher in the early 20th century named Quine. And Quine talks about webs of belief, that our beliefs are like webs. And on the outer portions of the webs, you can maybe change this belief or this strand of belief or whatever. And it doesn't really it doesn't really matter for the center portion of the web. But as you dive deeper into the web, it's harder to change those kinds of internal beliefs. So it takes a lot of strength, I think, to go, you know what, I was wrong. I thought this about this life, and I just was wrong. And I think people who are trained in the sciences or in scientific thinking or in philosophical thinking tend to come by it a little bit better. Carl Sagan has a quote where he approximated quote here. He says something along the lines of, it'll often happen in the sciences that scientists will say, well, that was a really good argument. I was wrong about my position, and I've changed my position to match the evidence. And he says, I've never heard of a person of faith do that. And it's because for faith believers, there is no objective criteria by which we can test their faith positions. Because again, the whole point is that faith is its own evidence. The conviction I hold is its own evidence. And so you have this thing where, well, I'll never change my beliefs. I believe this to the end. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can show me. There's nothing I can read. There's nothing that can demonstrate to me to get me to believe differently from what I already believe. And to me, that's a very dangerous way to be. It's a very dangerous position. Like you were saying, Chris, faith kills. This is the same kind of faith that causes people to fly planes into skyscrapers, you know what I mean? And to murder children, and to deny science and all the things that go with it. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's also wrapped up with all the things that they see that they think is good about faith, right? Community and a deeper meaning for life, and trusting when times get tough that someone's looking out for you, and all these. Obviously, everybody kind of wants to believe, oh, hey, life, there's everything's going to be okay, and there's some deeper meaning to it all, and I fit into the bigger picture somehow. And is there life after death? I don't know. I hope we get to continue on forever. All these things that we can't know, and that really have no bearing on what it means to deal with the moment that we're all dealing with, which is right now. On your show right now, early in the morning, Chris, we're all here at this moment right now. The past gone, the future,
right?
Who knows? You know what I mean? But so there's a lot of supposedly laudable things about faith, but I think you're right that unfortunately this way of knowing, again, is not no way of knowing at all. And anybody who wants to pretend that they're knowing things that they don't know probably has deep-seated emotional or psychological problems. You know what I mean?
It's dangerous.
And, yeah, exactly. And it doesn't matter if it never comes to fruition. It never matters. It doesn't matter if somebody doesn't, by faith, go kill somebody else. The disposition itself is dangerous. I'm interested in method. I want to know, how do you arrive at the ideas that you arrive at? What is the method by which you arrive at these ideas? How do they make sense? And if you ultimately come to the conclusion that, hey, man, I just know it by faith, I think our conversation is over. You know what I mean? How can you get behind that? There's no way to, to peel that onion back. I think we've hit the center. Again, it's a circle. It's a circle, and that's the circle. And a lot of people, whether it's faith in the authority of the Bible, or whether it's faith in aliens as the progenitors of the human race, or whatever the faith position is, ultimately it's circular reasoning, and you can't keep running the same circle. You're going to just dig yourself around and around on that track. And I think all of us have had that experience of trying to talk with somebody and reason with somebody. And unfortunately, these beliefs are by definition unreasonable, because you can't reason with people. People who are locked in circular reasoning about their own faith positions are locked in a circle, and there's no way to break them out of that circle. In fact, the only thing I think you can do, Justin and Chris, both of you guys know this, is ask the tough questions. Ask the questions and get them to start digging themselves out. Like you were saying, they dig themselves into their own little graves, kind of, and they have to figure out how to get out. So when you have them arguing with themselves in a way, instead of with you, that's the only way to break through. And it takes a long, long time. I've had, as an example for me, excuse me 1 second.
We got questions for you, so whenever you want to pause.
Oh yeah. Once again, Daniel, the chat is blowing up for you right now.
Oh man, I ramble. I'm a rambler.
That's all right. So let me slip a couple in there real quick. They want to know where they can find more of you. Now we already have discussed that you don't have a YouTube channel yet.
Man, I'm working on it. Justin was telling me that that both you guys have been very gracious to have you on this podcast, and I would definitely like to, if I can be a benefit to anybody in this community, I would definitely like to do that. I'm not too techy, and I'm really bad at follow through, so I just I kind of need the person to walk me through it. But I plan on moving forward with Justin. Justin's been helping me get some things together, and I'm sure Chris, you'll be gracious enough to answer some questions for me too, But I do plan to kind of continue forward with this. Right now, I only have my Facebook author page, and I don't even have a book published yet. I'm working on publishing my first book, which we discussed last time, was a book on how-to bartending manual. just very basic, you know. It was like, but I have other books in the works too. So,
okay. Do you have a Twitter?
I do have a Twitter, but I never use it. I have like maybe three tweets in my entire history. But I can definitely start tweeting if you guys. I mean, again, I would want to do this for people who would like to know more, or at least would like to stay in contact with me. I feel like I burn so much time just scrolling Facebook and sharing memes. You know what I mean? That it's hard to be on all the social media platforms. But again, if I have something to offer, I would like to do that for you guys.
I'll update my description of the video after the show. I'll update it with. I've got to update it for the American Atheist people when they come on. But I'll go ahead and update it with your new links to your new Facebook page, and then whatever. I've got some other things there I want to add for you as well. Real quick, I want to let everybody know that we've got these two gentlemen are joining us until, for another 30 minutes to an hour, somewhere along there, depending on how things go. Then we're going to take a pause. I may even do a break on top of the hour, and so we can all take a break because I'm running an extra long stream today. I'm going to have American Atheist Allison Gill and Michael Surgeon will be joining me. They have a special message about oppression of atheists in our society, in our country. So that's going to happen. So sometime, if you don't mind, guys, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna put up a "we'll be right back" kind of screen. And then whenever for you guys, so y'all can, if you want to take a break at the hour, if you want to continue going. And then another little while after that, whenever we're done, I'll put up the starting soon page, and that'll let me get my new guests on, get rid of these jerks.
Yeah.
And then, so just be prepared. It's going to be a weird day today, guys. All my people in the chat, I appreciate you for hanging out. So,
yeah.
All right. Y'all go ahead.
I was going to say, just so you can have some idea about where to find me on Twitter, things like that. I'm not, again, I don't do big tweeting or anything like that, but my name is usually Gone to Babylon with underscores between the words. Gone to GONE_2TO_Babylon. And so I'm gone to Babylon. I've gone over to the other side, and I think that was just kind of representative of my migration away from Christian faith, which I think I mentioned to you. I in some ways held to a very late age. You know what I mean? I was probably 21 before I finally was like, 22, then there are better ways to explain life than this. And then I kind of flipped the script, went militant the other way for a long time. Now I try to be, kind of balanced and not, I think there was a lot of anger initially that, I felt like I had been deceived for so long that I needed to, prove to everyone that this wasn't the case. And now I'm kind of tired of proving things or trying to prove things, because I think you run into the same problems, Justin, on your show, especially with people like Pastor Taylor, is that you're running around in circles all day long. You're spending you're burning an enormous amount of time and energy defining terms just to watch them slip away through this kind of cat and mouse game of faith belief, you know what I mean? And it's exhausting, you know what I mean? I'm happy to tell people what I think or how I've come to reason about a situation and why I do. But when it comes to trying to deconvert, and that was the example I was going to go to, Chris, just real quick, if you want to, before any other questions come through. I have a good friend that I grew up with. She's there are three of them, triplets, but they're all born again Christians, and for a long time she was she's very active on Facebook. She posts a lot of stuff, and and she was evolution denier, and denied, science denier, evolution denier, of course, special creation. And what I did was, through private conversation, I mean, I would, poke at her a little bit on Facebook, and we would have some exchanges. And one time she says, "Oh, I don't understand how you can look at a face of a child and not believe in God." And I posted a picture of starving children in Africa, and I said, "Like this," you know what I mean? And she's like, "I don't have an answer for you, Daniel. I don't know." She's just used to me razzing her. But I would also have private conversations with her because she's a friend of mine, you know what I mean? And I would email her, and we would talk, and I say, "Jessica," and I sent her some links on Wikipedia about what seminaries teach regarding evolution. And if any accredited seminary in the United States is going to teach theistic evolution, that evolution is true, but God directs it. And she couldn't believe what she was reading. And she's like, I don't understand, Daniel. I don't understand why all these Christian seminaries would teach this. And I said, because it's undeniable, Jessica, and the fact that you deny it makes you look ridiculous. You know what I mean? It makes you look and not a little foolish. And I think that it really shook her. Of course, she's still a believer, and she's still her goal is to make people's lives feel more meaningful, and to be kind of that person that teaches and stuff. But I know for a while there, she was really like, it dawned on her that there's this whole other way of looking at the world that she just wasn't getting. And I think that the more that we can do that for people, that let them have their fairy tales, as long as it's not dangerous in some way, but ask the hard questions and provide the evidence that they need to look into themselves and say, hey, you know what? The things that you're telling me don't add up, you know, and you have no hope of converting me to that kind of position, but I would really appreciate you looking a little deeper into it yourself. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I stand with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The good thing when it comes to somebody who, you know, kind of about the faith thing, when they say that their faith is based on evidence, I try and get this 3-part thing going to where your beliefs are based on evidence, or your faith is based on evidence, and your evidence justifies your belief. So why don't we chuck out the word faith and just present the evidence? There's no need for faith at that point. Faith is simply there. I mean, according to Hebrews 11:1, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. So if you can't see it, if you can't prove it, if you don't have that proof, then there's no need for that word faith to be in that stepping, you know.
Yeah, can't know by faith, and I think that's the ultimate thing there. You know, if we had evidence for what we believe, we would need faith, right? That's the whole. So to say that, oh, you know, I have faith that this is true, that's all well and good, but that does nothing for me in terms of how can I know that you know what you're talking about or that you're interpreting it right. And this goes back to Justin, what we talked about last time on your show, the idea that there are different ways of knowing things. I mean, of course, we all experience, you know, we all have our experiences, and you know, I can say, well, I know that my kitchen floor is tile or whatever, you know, these kind of things. But when we're talking about knowledge of things that we don't have experience of, there's really no higher form of authority than a wide, diversified consensus expert judgment. You know, and this is exactly what makes the sciences so powerful, right? If I wanted to know about, how microbiology works, I'm going to go to school and take classes, or I'm going to read books and take classes by people who have gone out and conducted experiments and worked with each other and offered their evidence and their hypotheses to peers for review in order to have peer review. And things that have passed peer review are then used as building blocks for constructing the theory more robustly, more tightly, and that thousands and thousands and thousands of experts in this field all come together and agree about a common set of facts and definitions of terms is quite literally the highest bar for knowledge that we have, because it's not like the old days. You know, in the old days, it was this notion that knowledge and truth were easily obtained. Anything new was dangerous. You kind of had to depend on papal authority or church authority in order to have the truth, which was necessary, right? You needed the truth because only one thing was needful, and that was the salvation of the soul. If you, if you somehow toyed with this, it would, any of our methods today, scientific methods, anything that we do, would have been suspect for thousands of years. You know, we were the people that were, on the chopping block because of our skeptical natures and our ways of dismissing this kind of authority. But the thing is that now in modern days, the way that we understand knowledge and truth is different. The way that we understand knowledge now is that knowledge is a set of probabilities. We can't know things 100%, and especially things of which you have no experience. You know, so the thing that we have to ask is, what is most probably the case? And what's most probably the case is that the experts have the best judgment, the best understanding of the issues, more so than any layperson, more so than any independent investigator. And it's not that experts are always right. So this is where we don't want to confuse the notion of probabilistic knowledge with absolute truth. We don't want to say, oh, the experts always have the truth on their side. No, that's not true. Obviously, this is an evolving system. This is a way of knowing that self-corrects and that progresses in knowledge. You know what I mean? So we don't ever want to assume that, oh, just because the experts say it, it's true. We don't want to make that mistake. What we want to say is that what is most probably the case? And what is most probably the case is that a wide, diversified set of experts who all come together to form a consensus on a specific topic probably has the best understanding of the information, the evidence, the arguments for and against, and they're the best at piecing everything together. So if you want to know anything in this world, again, know in a probabilistic sense, because there is no absolute knowledge. If you want to know anything in this world, it's probably best to see what the expert consensus has to say. And that goes for the writings of the New Testament, that goes for quantum physics, that goes for cosmic evolution, that goes for what's the best way to make banana bread? I mean, obviously this is that goes into that goes into more of a taste, an aesthetic taste. But I think that people miss this. It took me a long time to put this together. I mean, I think I mentioned before that I went to school. I have a few degrees: history, philosophy, biblical studies, and I did a lot of postgraduate work in just lots of courses, lots of learning, and I just stuff that I enjoy. You know what I mean? But it took me a long time to put together the roadmap of how knowledge works in the real world. How does the hierarchy of education work? And why does it matter? You know what I mean? For most people, it doesn't matter. A lot of people have never gone to college and they don't really care at all about what some expert has to say because it doesn't affect their life in a meaningful way. But unfortunately, they don't recognize that it does. Everything that they do in their life, from driving their car to using their flat screen, plasma TVs, to jumping on the internet and discussing across space and time with two cool guys like you know what I mean? All this stuff is directed by expert judgment, expert finding, scientific finding, and the technology that comes from that. But unfortunately, as Carl Sagan said also, we live in a society that's completely dependent on science, and people are so woefully ignorant about science and what science is, you know what I mean? And I think that's really a huge takeaway. It's not that science has all the answers, it's that science is the best tool we have for determining what the case is. And
so
far, exactly. And we need to keep plugging those lines, man. The more that we sidestep and decided to jump into convenient beliefs or fake beliefs, we're really doing ourselves a disservice, and our whole species, our whole forward movement as a species. We're not giving it our best, I think. And this is my whole idea, is that if I do a show, I'm going to do something called functional atheism, and maybe write a book about functional atheism. It makes no difference. Everybody is essentially a functional atheist nowadays. The fact that we care about our futures and that we plan, we want to know what we want to be when we grow up, and we take care to invest in the stock market. And I don't, but I mean a lot of people do. We have retirements or this and that. All this would have been anathema to Christians of former times. You're not trusting God to take care of you. But we're all functional atheists at this point, because the question of God makes no real difference in the real world. You know what I mean? We all live our lives as if we have to decide for ourselves what the best course of action is. So I kind of feel like the God question is irrelevant. It really becomes to be irrelevant in a lot of ways. Do you believe in God? No, but does it matter? What does belief in God do? It doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? So I think I've kind of reached my point at that, where if it helps you spin better fairy tales to believe in God, have that. But it doesn't do anything in the real world. And to me, it's a waste of time. So that's my
the one slippery slope that we have to, one of the reasons why I have my show is because a lot of times I see atheists using the same argument that you do in a different way. You said, we have all these experts that spend their entire lives to try and find out the best model that we currently have. But a lot of people, they say, oh, well, this guy said it, therefore, it's got to be true. This scientist said it. And then you fall in, if there's a theist that you're talking to that knows about logical fallacies and that has taken these courses before, they know that you're falling into an argument for mad populum or the authority fallacy.
Sure.
So we just need to make sure that, the people that are using that argument and using science say it in the exact same way that you just said it, Daniel, because you were absolutely spot on when you explained how these people spend their entire lives, and the reason that we trust in them is because their own experimentation, their own models that they have, they are the best that we have, and their models our trust falls on the merits of what they can do, not who they are.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important distinction. You're right about that, is that we never ever want to defer to a personality as if he or she were infallible, because that's not true. And this is exactly why I always aim to say in exactly that way, that we want to defer to a wide, diversified consensus expert judgment on the issue. It's not about what one scientist says. It's about what the field as a whole determines through evidence, through argumentation, through their own. Because see, a lot of people don't realize it's not just like a scientist comes up with an idea and then all of a sudden we go, that's a cool idea. We should all think that. No. Science instead poses hypotheses, and those hypotheses are tested and peer reviewed and tested again and again. And it's really an attempt to knock it down. That's the whole point of science, is that you're really trying to falsify to the best of your ability any hypothesis that comes along, because you want to know, how can I make this not true? And only those hypotheses that those tests repeatedly continue to serve as provisional hypotheses going forward. And then the best ones get worked into a larger theory, of course. So and Nietzsche himself, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, has a quote here, a kind of pithy quote, says, "In the end, what are men's truths? Ultimately, only his irrefutable errors." And that's ultimately what science is. It's a set of irrefutable ideas that continue to stand the test of time, and not for want of trying. We continue to try to test them. There are people who continually try to disprove Einstein and his theory of relativity, but unfortunately, it keeps getting, well, not unfortunately, but I mean, for these people, unfortunately, it keeps on standing the test, and being demonstrated to multiple decimal points out, as far as the whole idea is that we make bold predictions with these hypotheses. So the best way, there's a reason why astrology falls by the wayside for most people, is because there are no predictions. It can account for anything. Just like Freudian psychoanalysis. One of the criticisms is that there's no way to prove psychoanalysis wrong. It accounts for everything. If you had a dream about a cigar, it's obviously a penis. Well, what if I have a dream about something this other? Well, that's all. It's also a penis, or it's not. It's like, in other words, it's a locked circular system that explains everything. There's no way to falsify it. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to come up with a theory in science. We want to come up with a theory that we can make bold predictions with, and then test those predictions to see if the theory works. And the bolder the predictions, the more merit it has if it passes that muster. So, and then it's actually, the scientific consensus is not a bunch of people all agreeing that something's correct. In other words, a scientific consensus is that all the scientists recognize through repeated experiments and studies that these studies all testify to the same thing. It's the studies themselves and the cross-referencing and the checking and this peer review itself that allows scientists to form a consensus. It's not what one person thinks, or it's not what two people think. Instead, it's what a field follows, because it's the most probable way of looking at the evidence. And I think that's the distinction. You know what I mean? So
I have a question for you real quick. You have 3 bachelor's degrees, is that correct?
Yeah.
You want to just throw them at us real quick, what they are again?
Yeah. So I do have a degree in biblical studies. That was what I started. I started when I first went to college. I was going to do biblical studies and philosophy. Biblical studies got put on hold, and I ended up going. I started at Christian college, but I ended up going to Cal State out here in California. So I got a history and philosophy double major, and then I finished my biblical studies degree through an online school out in Indiana. So those are my 3 BAs. I'd like to eventually get a master's in something. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth the money or what I would do it in, but I kind of feel like, I'm not done yet. I got to figure some more stuff out, but yeah, those are my 3. So history, philosophy, biblical studies, just stuff I've always been interested in,
Excellent. Well, earlier on the show, we were talking about contradictions in the New Testament between the resurrection of Jesus. Real quick, for future debates against future Christians, do you, Mr. Daniel, of course, Justin, if you got some, throw them in there. Do you have other interesting contradictions that you like to pull out whenever you're talking? Because one of my favorites is also, remember, I'm not really that into the New Testament yet, but I still got some knowledge. That, when Jesus is born, they take the baby, they go this way. And then in the other book, they take him and go this way. And then the other, so that's an interesting contradiction. What other contradictions are you keen on in the New Testament?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's definitely we should just state right out that these books offer different perspectives on the life of Jesus, and they are not. There's no way to harmonize them. In fact, that's one of the things that people have been trying to do for a long time, is create a harmony of the Gospels. How can all this stuff be true, and it be so wildly different? As you said, it can't be. If you look at it side by side, instead of reading it sequentially, I read all through Matthew, then all through Mark, then all through Luke, then all through John. By the time you devour that enormous amount of literature, you don't really notice all the differences in the text. But if you read them side by side, if you can line them up, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and read parallel in a way, you can have the differences start standing out, and there's quite a bit, definitely. And I think my favorite differentiation that I lean on quite a bit is because it's so easy to talk about, or at least to demonstrate, is that we have 4 Gospels in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the Synoptic Gospels because they all seen from one eye, synoptic, seen from from the same perspective. They all tend to tell the same story about Jesus in roughly the same terms, a little longer, a little shorter, little different twists here and there, and that's because Matthew and Luke both used Mark as a source. So they use Mark's rough 16 chapters as their source material, and they also have their own individual sources for stories that aren't found in either one. John, on the other hand, is entirely different altogether. It's a completely different tradition that has no connection with the Synoptic Gospels. Now, what I like to point out is the very different presentation of who Jesus is in these books. There are differences of the presentation of Jesus, his death, his message, his God, what he was doing here, the purpose of him, of his mission within the synoptics themselves. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, even though they seem to be saying the same thing, all are saying something slightly different for different audiences. But John is saying something entirely different altogether. So in the synoptics, what we have is we have a Jesus who is not really intent on everybody knowing who he is. He doesn't want people to know that he's the Messiah. His time has not yet come. He's out, healing the sick, people who have faith in him. He's happy to heal the sick, but he doesn't want to engage. He's telling people, hey, you know what? Keep this to yourself. Don't tell people I healed you. And there's the famous revelation of Peter, Simon Peter, he says, who do men say that I am? Jesus says, who do men say that I am? And they say, well, some people say you're John the Baptist reincarnated. Some people say you're a prophet. He says, but who do you say I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, you're the Messiah, basically. And he says, blessed are you, Peter, or blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And you will be, I will call you Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. It's a famous passage. But the thing is that Peter has apparently this revelation that he's the Messiah, but it's a very rare instance. Nobody really knows who Jesus is in these Gospels, and nobody really understands what his mission was all about, especially in Mark. In John, we have an entirely different picture. We have a Jesus who precisely does miracles and signs, so people know exactly who he is. And he's going around making statements like, before Abraham was, I am, John 8:58. He's aligning himself with the biblical God of the Old Testament. He's basically saying, I'm God. And the Jews understood perfectly what he was saying, in the text, of course. This didn't really happen. But in the text, the Jews really understand what he's saying. They pick up stones to stone him, and he says, many good works have I shown you from my Father. For which of these do you stone me? And he says, they say, for a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, that thou being a man makest thyself God. You know what I mean? And so they understood very well what he was saying, and he was not bashful. In John, he's not bashful about performing miracles so everybody knows that he's divine, and stating that he's divine and that his mission was to come so that everyone could have life. So I think that just really showing the very different kinds of presentations of Jesus himself tends to get people reeling a little bit, because we're all used to this fantasy theological picture that the Bible testifies to a single Jesus with a single mission, and everybody understands his death in the same way, and everybody understands that his crucifixion, what it was for, and that everybody knows that Jesus was resurrected. But that's not true, especially when you dig into the literature of the early Christian church. That stuff that didn't make it into the New Testament. You see, there were wildly different perspectives, and some people thought, some other Christian sects, these people consider themselves Christians, thought that the people who thought that Jesus died for the sins of humanity were completely mistaken, fools, and on their way to hell, because they misunderstood Jesus' whole message. So I think we tend to get blindsided by the presentations in the New Testament, but there's diversity within the New Testament itself. So I'm more interested in the way that these authors are presenting Jesus and the way they're using his death as a message, and Paul too. Paul's obviously our earliest Christian author, so he's somebody who we want to pay attention to about the early formation of the theological picture around Jesus.
Gotcha. Hey guys, we're hitting the top of the hour. Do y'all want to take a little 5-minute break, get some coffee, go to little nerds room for a minute? I'm going to put the Be Right Back sign up. We're going to take just a tiny little break. People who are watching, if you don't mind, take a little break, go to the thing at the place, and then we'll be back in just a few minutes. Awesome.
Cool.
All right, guys, we're back. Thank you for the break. You guys carry on visitating about what you were visitating on, show talk, and then, of course, back to your contradictions in the, or whatever. But contradictions, yeah. I really enjoy the contradictions because that's where I find my favorite arguing points is those contradictions.
Sure.
Can you explain this? Can you explain this? Can you explain this? And they're like, oh, no. So,
and the one thing that I found too is with the contradictions. First of all, most Christians don't know much about the Bible or the New Testament.
True.
The Bible in general, the New Testament in particular. They know the stories that they were raised on. They know the meta picture, the larger theological ideas,
the narrative.
And I think that's the thing that we want to get behind. So first of all, the meta narrative that comes out of the New Testament is different from what the New Testament works themselves actually say. But we've had 2,000 years here to kind of smooth out the wrinkles and keep on plugging along this idea. Most people read the New Testament. I think we went through into this last time too, Justin. And most people read the New Testament as it was designed to be read by the people who compiled it. And this is the magic trick, right? You open up the New Testament of Jesus Christ, right? And why is it called the New Testament to begin with? Well, if there's a New Testament, that implies an Old Testament, right? Now, Jews don't look at their scriptures and think this is the Old Testament. That's a pejorative term. That's already a Christianization of the revelations that Jews take for granted. Their work is called the Tanakh, right? It comes from the key words, the three main divisions of the writings, the first 5 books, the Torah, the writings, and then the prophets. These are 3 main divisions. So they call their work Revelation or the Tanakh or whatever. Jews believe obviously that Jesus was not the Messiah that they were waiting for, at least non-Christian Jews. But Christians, on the other hand, look at this older set of works by Jewish authorities, and not all early Christians believed that these writings were valuable, but the sect that won out over the 300-year or so battle between these different Christian sects, the sect that went out did hold on to the early Jewish revelations, but they called it an Old Testament, and that's because Testament just means covenant. So God has this covenant with the Jewish people. There's an old one in Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah looks forward to a new covenant, written on the hearts of the people. And what Christians are claiming is that with the revelation of Jesus Christ, this is the new covenant that was promised at that time. So now we have a new covenant, a New Testament. And so you open up the first page of the Bible, of the New Testament, and it's the New Testament of Jesus Christ. You start reading about the life of Jesus, right? Matthew, 28 chapters, pretty long, pretty detailed. You've got the Beatitudes, you've got the Sermon on the Mount. You've got a lot of, pretty much what it means to know about the life of Jesus, right? Then Mark, shorter, 16 chapters, pretty much the same story, just a little more, a little less flowery, a little more action-packed. Luke, kind of the same thing too, a little different, has his own stories, and then John, obviously wildly different. But ironically, the picture painted for us about Jesus and John is the one that a lot of times we're most familiar with, because it's the God man, Jesus the God man. And I think that when we think about Christianity, we often think that Jesus is in some sense God, at least from a Christian perspective. So we tend to, I know so many Christians tend to view John as their favorite gospel, because it is very, very pro-divine in terms of the way it pictures Jesus. But people don't realize that there is a process about how Jesus became God. And one of my favorite authors, my buddy Bartender, wrote a book called How Jesus Became God. And it wasn't as uniform as you think. There were different senses in which people believed Jesus to be God. Some people believe that Jesus became God at his baptism, or Jesus was adopted as the Son of God at his baptism, when he gets baptized by John the Baptist. The sky opens up, a voice comes from heaven. This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. And there's this idea that God adopts Jesus to be his Son in some senses. Then there are people who think that, well, Jesus became the Son of God in his resurrection, because there are passages in the New Testament that he became the Son of God by power of his resurrection. And then, of course, John, the extreme, is that, well, Jesus was always God. He was pre-incarnate. He was divine, and he was pre-incarnate. He was the Word, or the Logos, as the author of John writes. There's probably more than one author to the book of John, but You know, the prologue, the beginning says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word, that's logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was with God in the beginning. So in this kind of, excuse me, philosophical, mystical kind of way of looking at things, the Word of God, just like the wisdom of God, these are in a sense separate entities. They're still God, but they have their own personalities in a way. And so the author of John is basically identifying Jesus with this pre-incarnate logos or reason or word of God. And so you have a very high Christology, this kind of mystical, almost Gnostic then, you know. A lot of people look at John and see some proto-Gnostic ideas. And when we use the word proto, all we mean is that it was Gnosticism before fully becoming Gnostic. Or if I say proto-Orthodoxy, it means that all the things that were shaping up to be the Orthodox position, because the whole sleight of mind, sleight of hand trick that the New Testament plays is that everybody was all in agreement about all this stuff from the beginning, and it all goes back to Jesus, to eyewitnesses, and everybody's kind of telling the same story. And how can we not believe it? There's so many witnesses, there's so much evidence, and everyone's telling the same story. Are we just going to call these guys liars? That's the trick of the New Testament, and this, even in its organization, even in placing the Gospels first, which came much later. The stories of Jesus came much later in the development of the Christian message. Our earliest author, Paul, was writing to churches that he started in around the 50s. You know what I mean? The Gospels didn't come until Mark comes first at 70, Matthew and Luke about 85, 90, John around 100. So you're already, 40 to 70 years removed from the life of Jesus before you start having these things written down. And there was a long struggle about, how people understood the life of Jesus, the meaning of his death, the path to salvation. People thought about this stuff for years. We have evidence of early Christian sects who, some believed in one God, some believed in two gods. So we have Christian sects that some believed in 360 gods, and they call themselves Christians. They claim to have books going back to the apostles, and that's what we got to understand, is that a lot of this stuff is just forged in the name of these namesakes, like Peter. We have First and Second Peter in the New Testament. Neither of those was written by Peter, and the same author didn't write both of those either. They're written by different authors, and we can do this through an analysis of the language itself. In Greek, scholars look at the language, they realize these are two different authors, and neither one was the illiterate fisherman Peter. You know what I mean? And so I think that for a long time we've been giving these writings far too much weight in terms of their credibility. If we look at the New Testament and unravel it in a way and say, okay, well, you know what? Let's look at how it developed. How did this story develop? I think that's where we start to sober up a little bit. The intoxication of this trick that's been played by Christian authorities for the last 1,700 years, since Nicaea and after. It starts to come apart. You know what I mean? But we're only in a position to do that now that we have so many sophisticated approaches to study the Bible academically, not devotionally. Let's study it academically. Let's put it in the context of its times, these writings. I think it's a mistake to treat the Bible as a single unit. It's an anthology of writings that are not all saying the same thing, which is why it's impossible to say, oh, well, what does the Bible teach about salvation? What does the Bible teach about, life after death? Or what does the Bible teach about, take your pick. The Bible doesn't teach any single thing about these things, because it teaches a lot of different things, because all these writings come from a lot of different authors who thought a lot of different things about these ideas. You know what I mean? And the mistake is to assume that all these books are all saying the same thing. They're not. They're all saying something very different, even within the short span of the writings of the New Testament. And by short, I mean relatively short, right? 48 CE is First Thessalonians, our earliest Christian writing that we have, and probably 120 CE, Second Peter, probably the last writing of the New Testament to be composed. So you have roughly about, roughly about a 70-year window, within which all of these writings in the New Testament were composed. But remember, this is a small portion of the writings that were created at this time. We have lots and lots and lots of early Christian writings, other gospels. You ever wonder why there's not a gospel of Peter? Peter was the rock of the church. We have a First and Second Peter. There is a gospel of Peter. It just was a little too controversial to actually make it in the canon. But there were sects for hundreds of years, that believed that the gospel of Peter was written by gospel and was gospel true, so to speak. It was their gospel. And it contains, Justin, we were talking, contains the resurrection account, which is missing in the New Testament Gospels, right? So in the New Testament Gospels, we never actually have anyone witness the resurrection of Jesus. We have the death, We have the tomb, we have an empty tomb, and we have post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. But in Peter, we actually have a picture of Jesus emerging from the tomb, followed by his gigantic cross, and the cross talks in Peter. And people believe this to be true. You know what I mean? And I think it really cuts to the quick in a lot of ways of these New Testament Gospels are no more historically reliable in some senses than these other things. In some senses, they are. We can definitely determine some historical picture from the New Testament Gospels, but a lot of it has to do with the historical picture of the time that they were composed rather than the time of Jesus himself. It was already when the religion became about Jesus instead of the religion of Jesus, which was very different, you know. So,
well, that was kind of a good one. Somebody was talking in here about the Nietzsche.
Sure.
And your views on Nietzsche. You know, we probably have all day tomorrow. We're about a quarter hour into this one, and like I said, I've got another stream starts in 45 minutes. So what I'll probably do is, if you want to run another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll I'll put up the Be Right Back stream, and we'll do the thing. Yeah,
that sounds good, man. You know, Nietzsche's my favorite. He's my guy. You know, when I was coming out of Christianity, you know, and beginning to see the world in different ways. You know, it was actually, so my own personal history on this is that, you know, I went to a Christian college. I got kicked out twice. You know, tend to be a little bit of a rabble rouser there. But I did finish a year there. And then I transferred to secular college. And, you know, so I took on a history degree. You know, I had a child early, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to get a job, so I should, you know, become a teacher. So I went through a history degree. And going through that degree helped me appreciate the concept of the historical philosophy, what Nietzsche calls the historical philosophy. And that's that everything develops. It's evolution, that things change over time. That not only do we develop, just let me use the analogy of, as a child, you're born into this world, and you slowly begin to learn what the world is all about. Your parents teach you, you go through your experiences, and your mind changes over time about how to understand the world. Well, the same thing happens collectively to humanity. The history of intellectual thought has actually been a progression, so that people in the past weren't capable of thinking about things that we do today in the ways that we do, because those thoughts had not yet been invented, neither have words, neither have the deep understanding. So, and we only have thoughts for which we have words, you know, so we can only kind of reason in our head for the vocabulary that we have at hand. And so what I did was I went through this historical, you know, this history degree, and by the end I was reading through the complete works of Nietzsche, and he really opened my eyes, because I think part of the problem is that people find faults in their paradigms. So if you're a Christian, or, you know, whatever belief you have, it's a way of looking at the world that you've been taught, and that you've spent even that's a lot of time working out your experiences in light of this paradigm. And there are faults in it. You know, it obviously doesn't map on everything, and we tend to have a crisis of faith when our paradigm can no longer map onto our experiences. So that happened for me, you know, and I started going through the writings of Nietzsche, and I was able to start seeing somebody who had his own crisis of faith. A lot of people don't realize Nietzsche was a very committed Christian early on in his early teen years. He was the son of a Lutheran pastor. He had, like, you know, going back a long ways, his grandfather actually won an award for defending the faith. He was a prolific track writer. So Nietzsche was very well versed in Christian history, Christian theology. Very, very bright dude, and he had his own loss of faith. You know, when he started going to college and discovered the classics and philology, or, you know, basically the study of classical writings and literature. And he broke his mother's heart. You know, he said, "Hey, I'm not a Christian anymore." He was initially a theology, philology double major, and he dropped the theology, and he just went solely with this classical study. And you know, I think that he felt alienated for the rest of his life because of that. Alienated. His father died when he was young, so alienated from his mother and his sister, and he spent the rest of his life trying to figure this out. But he was the product of the best schooling of the time, which was Germany at the time, Prussia. He went to a highly recognizable, a highly praised state schooling boarding school. It's kind of like a military school, and they developed, and it was an artistic school too. So they developed him in ways that he was basically the best product that you could create at the time. And you know, he was a historian, he was a philosopher. He knew the writings of philosophers backwards and forwards in the original languages. He was basically, I like to call him a liminal event. A liminal event is one that looks forward and backward. And he was basically the best critique of intellectual history up to his point, basically over the 1880s, we'll call it, in terms of his major writings in the 1880s. And he also saw how this train of thought was moving forward and where it would break down. And that's why Nietzsche's been called kind of the prophet of the 20th century, because he foresaw a lot of the stuff that was going to go down, simply because he understood how thought was breaking down and how it was developing, and the problems with what we had been believing so far. So, I mean, I can't praise him enough. And I think I mentioned Chris and Justin that I do intend to. That's going to be my next book once I get this bar book published. My next book is going to be unraveling the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, because I think a lot of people are interested in him. And he has a lot to say, but that's the problem, is he has a lot to say. His writings are, he had a very long, prolific writing career, and a lot of people don't even know where to start.
Right.
When you hear a quote by Nietzsche, how do you know that that's, he's one of the most quotable, because he writes in this aphoristic style a lot of times too, people quote him left and right, but the problem is that nobody really knows, what did he believe? What did he think? How, what were his ideas? And there's a method to the madness there. And I would like to kind of create something for the lay individual who's interested in Nietzsche and wants to know a little bit more about what he thought or how his writings work. But he was definitely, he changed my life. He was definitely somebody who, and he kind of has a style where he's writing to you, the reader. It's kind of like this inside secret between you and me, between ourselves is one of his things that he likes to say, and he's writing to a future readership. And he states this overtly, that he's writing for future philosophers and people who think like him, that there were so little of that, of those kinds of people in his own time. And he often felt like he was completely alone. And from the first moment that I picked up works by him, started reading him, I felt a kinship, and I felt like he understood things in a way that I was beginning to understand them. And he really took me. I mean, that sounds a little silly, I think, but I kind of felt like he was a mentor or a teacher that I really needed at that time. And he had the same view for himself. His own mentor was Schopenhauer, German philosopher who came before him, and he had the same idea. This idea that we tend to choose our mentors and our teachers based on whatever it is we're going through in our lives. And I can't say enough good things about that guy. So,
well, real quick, back to the religion stuff. Okay, so now you're into the YouTube and streaming and doing stuff with us and doing stuff with him. And when are you gonna start debating?
Oh man, I guess I can get on that. I've always thought of, oh man, I would love to debate. I would love to get in a debate. It's just kind of a fancy, or just kind of a thought. I'm always open to a debate. The problem is that I feel like I have a rambling style. I mention blah 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 blah. I just kind of go on and on and on. Yeah, you can tell, right? And that's just how my mind works, I guess.
But yeah, it works.
And it's always and this is always going on in my head. And I would definitely want to provide a good debate, not just a rambling of my ideas. So I'd be happy to do it. I would definitely want to tighten up my delivery in some way, because obviously with debates, and I have debated in the past, but obviously with debates, there's a format, there are rules, there are time limits, etc. And so I'm always open. I'm always open for a debate. So
I've actually been thinking about trying to get some people, maybe moderate some debates on my show.
Yeah.
So I mean, if there's somebody that you're interested, or somebody that I have on my show that you would be interested in debating, or they would be interested in debating you, if you guys want to get something together, I'd be more than happy to moderate a debate. I know Math Pig, he's the one that moderated my debate, and I'm sure he'd be more than willing to help out. But I mean, by all means, if you want to schedule something on my show, I'd be more than happy to moderate it for you.
Yeah, sounds fun, man. Like I said, here's the one thing with debates too, is that we tend to approach a debate with an interesting question. For instance, your recent debate with Pastor Taylor, can we rely on the Bible, as the Word of God, or as authority for God? The problem is that when you start getting into the debates, there's so much legwork that needs to be done to define terms or to narrow down specific questions that we tend to start speaking past each other. We're representing different ideas, and we're trying to get to the bottom of what so and so believes. So I think that when it comes to debates, we really want to get as specific with the question as we can, and I think that's the first thing that we need to do. Because a lot of things that seem like good debate ideas turn out to be just a lot of talking past one another and a lot of presentation of so much information that especially if it's something that you're into and something that you're really interested in, you have a lot of information about those things. And most people don't. Most people are not thinking about these things all day long. So they want to know what you think about them, right? But unfortunately, what you think about them is so much that you really got to figure out what are the key points that I need to chisel out here so that these people can follow what I'm saying. And they have to be the same points that you're chiseling out as the other person, and not the same beliefs, but at least tracking with the other person. It has to be so narrow. So again, I'm totally into the idea of debating somebody, but I would definitely want it to be, I would be interested in making it a profitable discussion for everyone, and not just a lot of that you said this, or you don't know what I mean by this, or
I think it's always useful to have a small conversation beforehand. Just, all right, this is what the debate's about. Let's define our terms real quick. We don't have to go into talking about what we believe and why we believe it, but what's faith? Okay, so you're a Christian. What denomination? These simple questions to kind of line you up with what they actually believe. Because a lot of times, like for example, a lot of times opening statements are scripted. I typed mine out before the debate. My debate was a little unorthodox because I actually typed up my conclusion before I ever heard anything that Pastor Taylor had to say. I was basically already prophesizing or predicting exactly what his argument was going to be, and I mean at the very end I was correct. My conclusion lined up with his argument, and that's always good to kind of know, because you can start to talk past each other. And most of the time it's in that opening statement because you already have that opening statement written out. Now, when it comes to the rebuttals is when you can try and okay, so he mentioned this in this context or this type of way, and I'm going to try and address it in that same type of way. And if I disagree with that definition, then I'm going to say, this is what he said, this is what he believes this means, this is my definition of it, this is what I think it means. And then in his rebuttal, he can respond to your definition of that. And then once you guys get to the cross-examination portion of the debate, then you guys both know what each other means by it, and you can try and use that person's definition of it to basically get them into a corner that they have to fight, and they have to fight out of. And a lot of times, if you're doing it right, they have to fight their own words.
Yeah, that's the key right there. Because I think a lot of times burnt in debates. I've seen quite a few debates, and obviously we all have our favorites, people that get up there and just kind of lay it down. But a lot of times I see a lot of time burnt in debates, not erecting and knocking down straw man arguments. You know what I mean? And it's just I want to make sure again that anything that I do or anything that I deliver for the community is going to be profitable, and it's going to be something that people are interested in, and it's not going to be a lot of well, I bet you're misstating my point and this and that. It's just I really want to. So, and I think that comes to So, in other words, what I'm saying is that if I were to engage in debates, I would want my debate opponent to be somebody who was like-minded in that sense, not believing what I believe, but understanding that this is my goal in the debate. It's not to show everyone that you're stupid or convince you that you're wrong. I want to present the information in a way that's going to be profitable for people, including my debate opponent. You know what I mean? So I'm definitely open to it, Chris. Definitely open to it, Justin. And I think we can definitely line something up here in the near future.
Cool.
Excellent. Okay, guys. You know what? I'm gonna wrap it up. It's 10:30, I guess, Eastern time. I'm working on that. 10:30 Eastern time. So yes. I'm gonna put up a stream starting soon with the music playing over and over again. Because I've got another stream that's going to start here in half an hour. I will have two people from American Atheist. It'll be Miss Allison Gill and Michael Soldier. Dang it, I keep doing that. Soldier. Is it Michael Surgeon? I don't know. They're kind of the opposite of each other. Anyway, Michael Surgeon, both of these from American Atheist, will be here in half an hour to talk to us about discrimination against atheists in the workplace and stuff like that. They've got other topics that they're going to visit with us about. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that. I want to thank you guys for joining us. Man, you guys are wonderful. Daniel?
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
You're wonderful. And Justin, thank you for showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah, if I mean,
tomorrow too.
So for those who don't know, I believe Daniel is going to be my recurring co-host on Friday. Or Daniel, I'm sorry, that other guy, Justin.
That other guy over there.
Justin is going to be my. I just renamed you. Anyway, Justin's going to be my recurring co-host for Friday, so he'll be here tomorrow, and then Daniel will join us again tomorrow for funsies to hang out and visit.
Good. Sounds good. Yeah, so, if any of your guests or any of your audience has any questions, we can get a little more into Nietzsche tomorrow. I'm always happy to talk about that, guys. So we can definitely get into that. But yeah, it's been fun, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you. And for those of you watching, just stay on the stream. There'll be a couple of panels, and then half an hour later, we'll start again. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome back to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. I have got special guest host Randolph Richardson, the president of Canadian Atheists. He's going to join me today as we visit with Allison Gill. She is the American Atheist Vice President for Legal and Policy, where she manages the organization's federal and state advocacy for religious equality and litigation activities to protect the separation of religion and government. Good morning, Allison. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. And we've also got Michael Surgeon with us. You know, I made a promo yesterday and I called you Michael Soldier. Yeah, I'm a bad man. I'm a bad Chris. I thought I'd watch. I'd ask you and see if you noticed. He noticed. Damn it.
Oh, I noticed.
I'm going to hell. Anyway, we've got Michael Surgeon. He's a lifelong atheist, a secular activist, and a drag performer from Southern Oregon. Interesting. As part of his environmentalist work, he helped the Rogue Action Center stop a pipeline from being built in his state. Good morning, Michael.
That's amazing. Good morning.
Yep.
It is wonderful. And then, of course, Randolph Richardson. Most of my people are familiar with Randolph. He's been on the show a couple of times. He's the founder of the Canadian Atheist.ca, right?
Yep.
I keep saying .org. I'm a bad man.
But anyway. of course, our focus here today is atheists.org.
Of course it is. And they have specific topics they want to visit with us about. Miss Allison.
Great. Well, I'm here today mostly to talk about the U.S. Secular Survey and the recent report we just put out a couple days ago called Reality Check, Being Non-Religious in America, which is the first report from the survey. Okay. So you can read all about it at www.secularsurvey.org. And it has the materials and a little bit of a description about what it was. So we conducted the Secular Survey back in October and November of 2019. And this is the first major report that we're putting out that has all the survey data. Okay. It's a survey of about 34,000 non-religious people across America. So it's the largest ever data collection for our community, which is pretty amazing.
Okay. I just put a link.
Significant then.
Yes. And this is I think it's a massive step forward for the movement because now we actually have data to back up our assumptions. I mean, people think a lot of things and they have some anecdotes about discrimination, things like that, but it's not the same thing as data, right? Anecdotes are not the same thing as data. And now we can say so much more than we could before, and that'll be useful in so many different ways, like advocacy, program development, getting funding, all sorts of different ways.
Okay, I put the link below in the chat. I put the link to the secularsurvey.org for those who want to go check that out.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Have you had any pushback on the survey results from anybody?
Not really, not yet. Mine are. I've had a few questions about, why did we take this approach and how is it helpful, and the survey design. There's a few people. I think there's some confusion around the idea of religiously unaffiliated people and non-religious people. And so you have some really great population, survey research done by the Pew Research Center and PRI, which looks at a broader category of religiously unaffiliated people, sometimes called nuns, which are about a quarter of the population in America right now. But that's not the same thing as non-religious people. A significant portion of those people, think about a third, say religion is very important in their lives. And about 60% say they believe in some sort of higher being or deity. So that's not the same thing as being non-religious. So our study was on non-religious people that affirmatively identified with one or more labels like atheist, humanist, skeptic, freethinker, as opposed to the broader category. So because we really need to study our own community in greater detail, and that was just lacking before.
I think this is great progress because one of the things that happens is people who are atheists, who don't believe in deities, will often due to feeling pressure to be politically correct or not offend people in some way, they'll use different terms like skeptic or freethinker or agnostic or not affiliated. So hopefully things are changing positively in that way, so people can just kind of be more honest about who they are without having to worry about the stigmatization, which is something I think you do great work on.
Well, I appreciate that. We did look at both how people identify and stigma. And we found that about the highest that everybody identified with, the label that everybody identified with to the highest degree overall was 95% of people who took the survey identified as atheist to at least some degree. And we also saw that the highest primary non-religious identity was atheist at about 57%, with the second highest being humanist at about 14%, and every other labels being smaller. So I mean, I think that is, a very recognizable label. And we saw, this is not, I should say, this is not representative of all non-religious people. It's representative of people that took the survey. So that's 34,000 people, which is a ton, right? But it's not all non-religious people. But we do see that among this population, atheist was the label that most people identified with.
Do you have any expectation of when that survey may be run again in the future?
No, we don't have intention to do that at this point. I mean, we just released it. So there is some value in seeing how things change over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm thinking like maybe 5 years down the road or something.
And that's very possible. But this was a major and also expensive endeavor, and so we can't do it too often. But it was, I think, absolutely necessary for us to progress as a movement and really make change. So it's why we undertook this.
Well, Tom sent me some interesting articles, and I've been posting the links to the secular survey and the articles in the chat. The articles about the effect this has had on the LGBTQ community, and the stigma that is faced by atheists. I didn't realize. I always knew, I guess, but I didn't realize it was that bad. Maybe I lived my sheltered little life.
Well, that's one of the major takeaways. Oh, I'm so sorry, Michael. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the survey kind of points out the really large amount of stigma and discrimination atheists face, especially members of the LGBT community who identify as secular. That is such a big issue. Even for me, just using the word atheist, people just have this. There's this connotation with the word that just to them seems so negative. Right. And so I'm kind of just reclaiming that word and turning it into a more positive thing. A lot of people like to use the word secular humanist. That word is also very positive and reaffirming for our beliefs. And I think that what the survey points out is just that there's a lot of stigma and discrimination towards us, especially if we identify as secular, right? And so we're kind of highlighting that and showing that, hey, this isn't right. What can we do to change this?
And it also shows the repercussions of that stigma. It shows how it affects people's mental health. It shows how it affects educational attainment. So things that are measurable, that are scientific. So we can both show there's discrimination and stigma, and we can show the effects of it, which really matters for education and public health purposes to, social scientists. And the biggest takeaway I had from this report was, the huge divergence between discrimination and stigma in not very religious areas and in very religious areas. And I think as someone who's grown up, I grew up in New Jersey, which is very liberal, and now I live in Washington, D.C., which is also, a very cosmopolitan city. It's not the same. And I think many atheists in, California and, New England lose sight of how bad things are in very religious areas. And so one of the major goals of this was to show that there's really two Americas for non-religious people. And, we can't lose sight of what's actually happening in our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, do you, I don't know if you have some kind of pride parades going on annually in your area. We have them here in Greater Vancouver, and they just get bigger every year and more companies join them. What is the tone like if you do have them? And,
so I live
and is there much rejection from people as well in print and on news and radio and whatnot?
Yeah, so Oregon's kind of weird. So we have the super, people think Oregon's really liberal, but I live in the rural Oregon area, so this is typically back of the woods kind of people. I don't live in Portland or Eugene, so obviously there's a lot of tension, I would say. There's a lot of religious leaders. We have preachers, we have people protesting my shows, outside my shows with signs, armed protesters, and especially religious people, we have abortion protesters, which I'm assuming is pretty much everywhere, there's this push for anti-science, and so I faced a lot of that. And we do have pride parades in Ashland every year, and those, we have protesters there, but the point is to, when met with adversity, we have to push through and remain, because it's important for us to, stay vigilant, and, because, there's a reason these people are protesting us. There's a reason they don't want us to speak the truth. They don't want us to, promote our beliefs.
They want you to be visible, right?
Yeah.
Or lack of beliefs there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
They
Let
want
me
to
ask.
deny our existence.
Do you think for some of you who are older, we've got this survey coming out. Do you think we're making progress as a nation? I mean, I thought we were, because I'm a little older. I remember the way they treated gays and transsexual people and stuff back in the 80s, before I believe Michael was even born. It's a lot different now. There's a lot more free reign now than they have, a lot more, and they can do so much more. There's a lot more equality that they have now. And then, of course, when you lump atheism is in there as well, right? There's just a lot more now, less stigma than there was. Go back to 1974, and you've got LGBTQ person, and then tack on atheism, and man, somebody's gonna be setting you on fire somewhere.
I think that's certainly true. I mean, when I transitioned, I tried to do it in college, right? And then there was like no resources at all. And that's not true these days. I mean, they often have LGBT resource centers. And there's a lot more acceptance of LGBT people. I mean, we have marriage equality now. And, it's just amazing. Now, of course, there's pushback,
right?
But there's been steady progress over time, and there's more acceptance. Which is good, and it's incredibly important. And I think we see that young people are coming out earlier. We see people are more likely to identify as gender fluid, and it's just very accepted. I mean, it depends on where you live, of course, but very accepted.
Okay. Well, there's that. So now that we've said that, and we've said how bad it used to be and how good it is now, we still have a ways to go. There's still it's not as bad as it used to be, but man, they still have a lot of, I want to use the word oppression, both for atheists and I didn't even realize, I was reading this article, about this atheist gentleman, or who became atheist, who left his religion, and the jobs he couldn't get, or the things that he had happen. These things are more real in this world than I tend to give it credit for.
And that's part of the point of this research.
Yeah,
because, we are a legal organization. We in FFRF, for example, get complaints all the time from people who face discrimination in schools and employment, and they're not able to access public services because they're run by religious organizations, those sorts of things. And, there's one-off incidents that doesn't register with people, but this actually shows how prevalent the problem is, especially in more religious areas. So it's really key.
Well, if you don't mind,
that's interesting that you get a lot of those kinds of requests. I wonder, we don't see so many here in Canada. What we get mostly are people, we do get some, but we get more requests from people in countries, especially where people are very extremely oppressed under religion, like Saudi Arabia and Iran and whatnot. They want to find a way to immigrate to Canada because they can't even tell their family and friends that they don't believe in deities. So do you get those kinds of requests as well, like the international perspective?
We do, and it's not something we focus on as much because we're, American atheists, so we focus on our country. However, we do send them along. We have several different partners. Like, for example, CFI has an amazing program called Secular Rescue, and we send people to them. When we get those sorts of complaints, we also inform our partners in, for example, ex-Muslims of North America, who are fantastic. So there's really great organizations that do that sort of work. It's not really our focus. Our focus is on complaints in this country.
Yeah, I would say the FFRF does a really great job with that, their program, and just helping secure funds for these people and making sure that they're able to escape these countries where they are constant being threatened with death just for their beliefs. It's definitely really important that we help these people and keep them visible.
Absolutely.
Well, part of the thing I've complained about so often is that we are underfunded and outmanned. We're outgunned. We've got groups. I can't imagine, I know how the Project Blitz, we rail about Project Blitz on here all the time. It doesn't even it's not even called Project Blitz anymore, I don't think. But we still call it that.
Name, but they still exist. Yeah,
That's right.
are you familiar with our site we put together? It's blitzwatch.org. It has a lot of resources on Project Blitz.
Wonderful. Blitzwatch.org.
Yeah,
put
it's a
that in the
campaign
chat.
we developed with many other national organizations, like from different, not just the secular movement, other movements, to fight against Project Blitz. And we've been very successful in stopping a lot of these bills and raising awareness. So I recommend going there. There's a lot of resources about the types of bills in Project Blitz. We also have a legislation tracker about showing where it's happening. So it's, blitzwatch.org.
That's wonderful. We've had Miss Green from Florida. We've had a gentleman from Kentucky. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. Was it Jeremy? Jeremy from Kentucky. Whenever they were talking, because of some of the things they're trying to push, the denial of care bill through Kentucky. These religious
so
people.
Bad in Kentucky this year. It actually passed one of the chambers. And I mean, think about that now in this context with the pandemic. Basically, they want to be able to deny care, any type of care, based on any belief.
Yeah.
That's absurd. How do you run a healthcare system like that? It's absurd. And it covered insurance. So I mean, insurance is of course going to use any excuse to not provide funding, right?
Of
You're
course.
just giving them a ready-made excuse. It's very fortunate that did not pass, and we fought very hard against it.
Very shameful.
Here in Canada, we have in our Constitution, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I think Section 15 forbids discrimination based on all kinds of different aspects, and all these things protected in Section 2, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of opinion, association, religion, and things like that. It sounds to me like something like that is needed in the U.S. Am I reading your response correctly?
Well, yes, and we do have non-discrimination laws federally.
Yeah,
so
we got that.
For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and we have the Title IX to the Educational Amendments of 1972.
So do the laws in Kentucky that are interfering with providing health care that you're just talking about, are they not in conflict with those anti-discrimination laws?
No, they're not, sadly, because those laws, they have limited scope. So they don't cover everything, and they don't. They only apply, for example, to businesses in. I think it's the case where they have to be 15. Is it 15 people or is it 50 people? I don't recall offhand. It's either 15 or 50 people or more in terms of employment, and they're of limited scope. There's not like religious protections against religious discrimination, which would cover non-religious people in every category. And also in America, each state has their own non-discrimination laws, and many states just don't have them, or don't have them in such a way that they don't cover things like sexual orientation and gender identity or religion, which they cover them in such limited scope that they're not applicable to health, or they have religious exemptions, which is really a big problem here. And I really just want to plug another resource we put together, because we've actually assessed every state in the country and looked at all their laws and how good they protect, the separation of religion and government versus having a lot of religious exemptions. And that's called the State of the Secular States. We do an annual update. It's at www.atheist.org/states. And it's, I hope, an amazing resource for local advocates and a roadmap about how to make more equality.
Do you have an idea of what kind of an undertaking it would be to get things improved at the federal level to remove those scopes so that everybody can be treated equally under the law?
Sure. There's actually a bill to do that. It's called the Equality Act. And it is a fantastic bill. It's supported by a number of organizations. We have submitted, testimony supporting it as well. And what it does is it expands the scope of non-discrimination laws to more fully cover sexual orientation and gender identity, and also religion in different areas. And it also expands what it applies to. Like, for example, the public accommodations protections under federal law. When I say public accommodations, I mean like businesses, railroads, banks, like anything that the public goes to, like a private business.
Anything that's publicly accessible.
Exactly. Right now, it's so limited scope at the federal level. However, this would expand it and make it more broad, so it actually applies to things like restaurants. You know what I mean? So that's a major part of it. It applies in a number of different areas that are not covered at federal law right now. So the Equality Act already passed the House of Representatives It got amazing. I was there. I was watching it in the galley. It was amazing experience because this is like the first national non-discrimination law that includes LGBTQ people. That was that is comprehensive. There have been others in narrow areas, but this is comprehensive, and it was just amazing. Unfortunately, it has not moved in the Senate, which is sort of to be expected.
So one of the concerns I hear comes up with the way the U.S. is structured is that compared to provinces here in Canada, there's a lot more autonomy in the states with each state. With such a bill coming into force, would that will the states still? Obviously, some are going to try to overrule it within their own states. What is your hope for how things go with that? Obviously, your hope is that they won't be able to overrule it, but I mean, realistically, what do you think is likely to happen? Do you think it's going to end up becoming a lot of constitutional fights for a while?
Is this a complex question? So generally in the United States, the federal law supersedes state law, which means that this would, if there's any state laws in conflict, this would overcome it if and when it passes. So that's not the problem itself. That's not the problem. The problem is we've seen opposition try to use religious exemptions and expand them in such ways that they carve holes into non-discrimination laws and basically try to make them useless. And there's some fights right now with the Supreme Court about that. And we're expecting decisions, any day, because that is a major concern. They try to say, oh, we get our religion means we get to discriminate and make it apply it as broadly as possible. And unfortunately, given the appointments that this administration has made to the judiciary, this frankly ridiculous argument is getting more purchase. So that's the problem. And there will be more constitutional fights along that issue.
Well, the thing that kind of gets me about it is how they do so much. These people who claim to be champions of peace and love and mercy and all this stuff, and at every opportunity they're trying to hurt somebody, whether it's the gays, the lesbians, the atheists, brown people. It just never seems to end in the limit of hurt and hate that these particular groups, and I'm speaking, of the ones specifically like Project Blitz and their nutbaggery that they're trying to foster.
Yeah.
I find them to be particularly dangerous.
It seems like they're trying to find a scapegoat through a lot of this, especially during this time. They have to find a scapegoat, right? So they're blaming somebody.
Well, for me, one of the things I like to point out is that we've kind of got them in a box. Christians, we've got them in a box now as far as the whole plague and all this other stuff, all the other things that are going on. We've got them in a box. Can they go to church? Can they not go to church? If they go to church, then they're proving their faith. If they don't go to church, then we go, oh, where's your God? You don't have a God. He doesn't have any power. And then they're, well, we better go to church. So they go to church to prove that they're protected. And we're like, hey, you shouldn't be going to church. And like, what do you want? Right? So we've got them in this kind of box right now. Am I the only one that sees that?
And just to point out, it's those churches that all have lightning rods on the roofs, right?
Yeah. So as far as those kind of groups, but so now we tinker with all this. We've got all these things going on, but in the background, Project Blitz is working, and these people who are like the back to Kentucky, the denial of care, because it points out so many things. Imagine I'm a Christian. And Randolph is a Christian, and we roll up on a car accident, and there's a couple of forgive me, there's a couple of lesbian people there, or gay people, or whatever, it's some kind of Muslim, anybody. I can get on the radio and go, you need to send another ambulance. Me and my Christian buddy here won't help these people because it's against our, they're allowing that. They're condoning that. That's what's the kind of activity. And so then your faith actively kills people.
Yeah, it's that exact thing happened years ago here in DC.
Really?
It was in a famous case with a trans woman named Tyra Hunter, who they discovered I think she was hit by a car. They discovered she was trans, and the ambulance refused to save her. And that that has happened. I don't know if they claimed a religious exemption, but that's what they would do nowadays. And that's what we're concerned about, these new rules. You know, you talked about public blitz, and that is terrible, but the real thing I'm seeing at the federal level is all these regulations coming down because they're so behind the scenes. You have to be such a policy wonk to understand what they're doing. But what they're doing is they're carving up civil rights laws, our civil, our protections, making the rules so that it's, easy to get around. They're giving all these privileges to religious organizations and trying to channel as much money to religious organizations as possible and remove any string about how they use the money. So that's basically what they're trying to do, is create a national church basically behind the scenes in some ways, by making sure that you have to include religious organizations when you're giving out federal money, but making it so that they're exempt from all requirements. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's very subtle, but something that's very important.
It sounds like there needs to be a general attitude change. If somebody's job is to be a paramedic or some other kind of person who's got a duty to protect society, that if they're making exceptions like that because of their own personal preferences, that they shouldn't be in that role anymore. They need to be replaced, which is kind of typically the attitude here. Although there are some people here who agree with people shouldn't have to serve a transgender person because of their religion. It's ridiculous. It's and it's so bad for society, because the long term is people die, as Chris had just pointed out, because they don't get the help that they need, and it's really not about any of this stuff, right?
Well, we should be putting faith over people.
Exactly. People, as I like to say, people are more important than ideas. It's a bit of a slogan I'm promoting. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I don't know. I think that's an important slogan, actually. I think that's one of the sort of things I believe is true too. So one thing I wanted to just bring it back to the report a little bit. One of the things it shows, which I mentioned a second ago, is that discrimination and stigma are so much worse in more religious areas, right? Which really does blow a hole in the whole argument that religion is a force for good. I mean, except in a provable way. If we're showing that discrimination and stigma is so much worse, then that it's the religion that's the problem in those areas.
Absolutely. I'm reposting those links for anybody in the chat to get to the secular survey that was conducted.
Michael,
the report is called Reality Check: Being Non-Religious in America.
There you go.
In Oregon, are you encountering a lot of discrimination in organizations that are serving the public and are publicly accessible, or do you find it's less of a problem there than other states?
No, I would say, like, with public organizations, we're very, like, we
very liberal.
We appreciate secular values, and especially with our government, state government, education level, pretty secular there. I would just say mostly it's the local group. We have the salt shakers. We have these hate groups that are actively trying to, like, spread disinformation and hysteria. It's just nonsense. And especially during this time, it just feels like they're just not, based in reality. There's, like, everyone's against them. It's like, I'm going to put myself and others' health at risk for my,
well, it's been famous on the news about bakers who won't make a wedding cake for people based on their sexual orientation in some cases. And when you look at other states and you compare with Oregon, assuming that you even do this, what kind of things do you think they could do differently to make things better for people?
In Oregon? Or just
in other states compared to Oregon? You're drawing from Oregon as an example of things are going in a good direction.
Yeah, so Oregon is very, like, we're against discrimination. We want to ensure that people, especially LGBTQ people, are not discriminated against based on their sexual orientation. They should be allowed to adopt children. They should be allowed to marry. They should be allowed to, have jobs that they seek. Religion just doesn't have a place within that, and that's kind of the big thing here, is that when, these courts, with that specific case, I believe the gentleman was, like, the court case went in favor of him, right? Like, because he
didn't want to talk about that if it's useful. I'll go into that but I don't want to interrupt you, so please continue if there's something else.
Yeah, I think that it was an interesting case. A lot of people like to bring that up. It's like, oh, well, this is about freedom of religion and all this stuff, but it's still discriminating against a group of people. So, that's kind of the thing a lot of these states need to realize is we need these, discrimination laws in place, anti-discrimination laws in place to prevent LGBTQ people from being, marginalized.
So I'm almost getting the impression that in Oregon, where you are, that a lot of the attitude is that religion is more of a private, personal matter than a public thing. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's kind of like church and politics. It's not something we talk about with family. It's like, oh, let's just,
Hey, Michael, could you tell me about your show? You've mentioned the show. What kind of show do you do, and what kind of reaction have you had to that show?
Oh, drag shows. Yes. So we've had several drag shows at the college, Southern Oregon University, where I'm a student at. And it's been a fun event. We raised money for the Trevor Project, and it's just a great community event for, people to come see. It's an all ages event. So it's not, we get a lot of community members and people with their kids and families to come and support us. And we've just seen a lot of these protesters show up with signs and, these religious protesters.
For the benefit of the audience, because many people may not know what a drag show is, could you maybe just give a general outline of what a drag show is and what happens?
Yeah, so drag is like where people dress as masculine or feminine. They can dress different from the gender that they usually portray in society, right? So a drag show is basically a place where we can sort of critique these gender roles we play in society and just kind of ridicule them and show, like, gender is this, it's on a spectrum, right? And so we can basically present these ideas, and for me it's very liberating, to dress and drag and to do these performances, because it's a way for me to sort of explore my identity, and I think it's great for the community too.
Now there are myths that do get spread around a lot about people who cross-dress, for example, and that one of the common ones is that all those people are gay. I'm guessing that you probably disagree with that. My understanding is that sexual orientation is incidental from whether somebody cross-dresses. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sexuality is, I don't think that really, not, yes, a lot of gay men do drag, but there's plenty of straight people who also do drag. And I think that, it is definitely a celebration of sexuality and gender identity, but yeah, I don't think that really plays into that. Anyone can do drag.
If we can go back to the topic about your shows, there were religious protesters you were starting to say?
Yes. So we've had people with giant signs, saying sinners, fornicators, all that kind of stuff, and so.
Have you ever felt threatened? I mean, has it ever gotten that out? Because I've recently had a couple of ex-Muslims on my show, and there's an entirely different tone to the type of sign holders they encounter.
Oh, right. So
Yeah. I was just curious what kind of environment they're non-threatening. I take it they just hold signs going to hell, kind of thing.
Yeah, and so they pass out these flyers with like rainbows on them, and it's like, hey, join the club, and then you look at the back of it, and it's like, you're going to hell. It's like, oh wait, it's like, oh, Jesus will save you. And so these people, they come and they try to like pretend like they're part of us, or they're part of the LGBT, but they're really just hating us, and they don't really.
Hey, Michael, we're kind of having a tiny hard time hearing you. Is there anything you can do? Do you have what kind of mic you got? Do you have a?
See if I can move the volume up a little bit here.
There you go. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
There was a recent incident down in Maryland, that we got involved with a drag time story hour. So that's when people in drag read to children, and
I heard about that.
Awareness and openness and inclusion, and it's all voluntary. It's at a library, and parents bring their children if they want to. No one's forced to go.
Yeah.
It was protested, and not only was it protested, but one of the protesters went inside and started screaming and threatening people, and everyone was very scared, because in this day and age, with all the shootings we have, that guy was, I think, charged and convicted of I'm not sure exactly, but making threats. So it was a pretty scary situation. And our field director, Sam McGuire, was very involved with that. And we basically got involved with the situation too, because there was some controversy at the town council. because they tried to withdraw some money from the library, and we were like, you can't do that. It gets against the First Amendment. So it's a really controversial thing in some places.
Yeah, I would definitely say that a lot of people, I would say I felt threatened when they were protesting at the events. I do think that, like, they're there to sort of engage with people, but, I didn't really engage with them, and I think that's probably for the best, because that's what they want, right? If they want your attention, they want you to get angry at them, they want you to yell at them, but I think it's best to just focus on what matters, and that is,
Gotcha.
putting on the show and entertaining people and creating discussions.
Well, I have maybe this perhaps naive notion of Nevada, Oregon being a little on the religious side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of there's a large foreign population.
Yeah, so that's why I was wondering about how they reacted to your shows.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't say it was really any of those groups. I think it's more of just the Salt Shakers, this Christian like activist group. They picket for Planned Parenthood, and they're always on college campuses spouting their hateful rhetoric. So.
Gotcha. The economy version of the Westboro Baptist Church. I get you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Planned Parenthood, and I do see a fair bit of rhetoric online from the anti-abortion crowd calling them murderers and all this stuff. They depict them as an organization that only performs termination of pregnancy and things like that. My understanding is that they do a lot more. Are you folks doing any work with Planned Parenthood? And what is it that you would say is different from the public perceptions?
Sure. Well, we partner with a lot of different organizations at the national level to support, for example, access to sex education, contraception, and abortion. And yeah, we're involved with different coalitions, and mostly with regarding to support those issues. So, for example, and we also engage in when the administration tries to put out these rules I was talking about in different areas. We also engage to oppose the rules. Like, for example, I think it was last year, they put out a rule about family planning funds. So basically funds that go for programs, mostly for people of low income, to access contraception so that they can better control the size of their families and get, access to doctors and wellness checkups, those sorts of things. It's mostly low income women, mostly low income, Black and brown women that, access those services. And they tried to put these rules in that created they called gag rules, so that they could not even talk about abortion or make referral to abortion centers even if someone wanted one, and try to restrict the flow of information between doctor and patient. So
that sounds like a violation of the First Amendment.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Well, that is being challenged in court at this very moment by groups like Planned Parenthood. So but that's how we get involved for the most part. We're involved in the coalition aspect, and we involved with writing those sorts of concerns, because there's always religious issues wrapped up in those things. Mm-hmm. There's religious exemptions built in there, so the two really go hand in hand, and so we have to be working on that with our partners.
Yeah, for a progressive society, we're not really there yet. Our sex education is minimal. They taught abstinence at my high school, and it was pretty, I would say it was very useful, unfortunately.
Right.
But I think that, Planned Parenthood does a great job of promoting sex education, contraceptives, and definitely an organization we would support. But yeah, a lot of, like you said, the Planned Parenthood that I have doesn't perform abortions. So they're basically protesting them for no reason.
Right.
These specific buildings, it's ridiculous. But for our society to be against abortion, it's actually quite disturbing. For this country to be so against abortion. Most countries are in favor of it.
And there's real concerns right now at the we're getting some echo at the Supreme Court level. I mean, there could be a case coming down called June Medical Services at any point, which could really drastically undermine access to abortion in the U.S. So it's very, very concerning.
See, to me, if the abortion, terminating a pregnancy, to me is a human right. It's a matter of personal liberty. If people are not permitted to terminate their pregnancy, that is tantamount to human slavery in a sense, because you're forcing somebody, because of a medical condition, you're taking away some of their rights. That's a fundamental problem.
And you're endangering their lives too. I mean,
yes, possibly, very possibly, yes. Yeah, but to me, I think the right for personal autonomy is there shouldn't need to be any kind of justification for terminating a pregnancy. If it's a freedom, it's their right. They choose it. It doesn't matter what their reason is, or if they have no reason for it. That's their right to do that. Just like with anybody else, a right to get a tattoo, or a right to get an earring, or anything else, or have some cancerous part of their body removed, or whatever. That's a right that they have, I would think.
Well, real quick, I don't mean to change the subject back to the secular thing, but I'm going to change it back to the secular survey, if you don't mind, because I imagine you probably have other questions or other things you want to talk about. You said you have an article, Allison, is that correct? You stopped Michael from mentioning an article earlier that you wanted to cover.
No, I think it was, I was going to talk about the Supreme Court case about that. I don't remember the context now. I'm sorry. Do you remember the context of the Supreme Court case? Oh, Masterpiece. Yes, it was a Masterpiece cake shop case, which came out.
Oh, the cake thing. That's right. Randolph mentioned the cake thing. That's right. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
And it was, so it's not about the secular survey, but we should definitely get back to that in a moment. But if you have any questions, let me know.
Well, I do have a point to make about the whole cake thing, if I may. It's a 2-second rant. Listen, if you don't want to make me a cake for religious reasons because you disagree with my lifestyle, I understand that that's a point we need to make, and I am not against people going for that right, whatever right you want. But I wouldn't want that person making me a cake. Sure. I wouldn't want that person making me a cake after I forced them legally to make them a cake. That sounds like a very bad thing. Sure. I'm funny about my food.
It's called a dignitary harm, because you're not just insulting that person or refusing that person. You're harming the community of people that are, LGBTQ.
Absolutely.
Or race-based or whatever, because you're basically denying their humanity as a group. And if you can deny services to that person, then it promotes other sorts of denial of services, and it basically lessens their ability as a group to access services in a way that we don't tolerate as a society. So it's like a harm to their dignity as people, if that makes sense.
It does. I do understand.
These are those people who feel empowered by that case. They feel empowered to continue to discriminate against queer people and deny our rights or deny our existence. And I think that's really the problematic or troubling part to me. The precedence of this case.
Of course, no, I agree with you. I agree with the point.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Chris. What was that?
My apologies. I'm just saying I agree with our side, the left side. I agree. I'm just. If you got the cake, would you eat the cake? I might go ahead and get the cake for the point of getting the cake, so we've made our point. But then I just don't think I'd be able to. How many toenails are you going to pick out of there?
The point is not the cake, though.
Of course, that's right.
Yeah. It's about discrimination.
Thank you. Yes.
But this case did not say that religious people have the right to discriminate, and there's some confusion about that. The case did not say that. At the Supreme Court level, they said, and I don't agree with what they said, but they said that the way that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission treated the case was discriminatory towards this religious person because of some of the language a few of the commissioners used, comparing sort of discrimination, connecting it to things like the Holocaust and other sorts of negative events in history. So, I mean, to say that is religious animus, I think is a huge stretch. And then to sort of impute that up and down the line and say that this was an unfair situation altogether, there's no evidence of that. So I think it was a very poorly reasoned decision. However, it's just saying basically if you have cases that are biased on the basis of religion, then that might be a problem when you go through these administrative processes. So that's what it's saying, and not the sort of, people can discriminate. At the same time, you have to realize this same-sex couple, were not able to access the services. They were still denied, and they got no resolution through this. And I don't understand how that's just either. So it's really a problematic case in many ways. But just to be clear, what it does and does not do.
Of course. Well, it came up, and I thought I had to throw in my 2 cents, my puny-minded opinion about it. So,
I wanted to just talk a little bit about the survey, if that's okay.
Please, yes.
On the report, I think a few really interesting things in here that are relevant are, we asked people about what their policy priorities are in different areas. And, some of them, I think the one that most people said was a priority for secular organizations to work on was maintaining secular public schools. And over half of people said that. And look, the other two top ones were opposing religious exemptions that allow for discrimination and access to abortion and contraception. So everything we've been talking about were the highest priorities of these 34,000 people that took the survey of non-religious people. So I think that's really, it shows how much our community, these things matter to our broader community.
Very interesting.
It sounds like a common theme there is for people to have personal choices and the freedoms to make those choices for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a kind of this battle between religious oppression and those who are trying to stop it. It's quite, I mean, as obvious as it sounds, right? On almost every front.
Yeah. Trying to carve holes into the places where we did stop it.
That's a great way of putting that. Whenever you said that earlier, they were using the state laws to try to carve holes about the using religious liberty into the federal whatever. I mean, I was like, oh, that's how they're doing it. The first time you said the carving holes metaphor, I immediately imagined a constitution printed on a block of cheese and people carving holes in it and eating it.
You're not far off. I mean, you're trying to write the establishment clause out of the Constitution. So yes, that's exactly, it's not just the civil rights laws, it's also our constitutional protections, unfortunately, that are really at risk these days in the courts. So another thing I found really interesting about the report, though, was how engaged non-religious people are. There's this stereotype that non-religious people don't vote, but that's not true at all. I think what happens is people look at the broader category of religiously unaffiliated people, and they have a lower voting rate. But if you look at our survey, you see about 95% of people who took the survey, 34,000 people, were registered to vote. And about 87% voted in 2016 and nearly always vote. So that's much higher than general population. So it just goes to show you that, non-religious people are very engaged and watch these issues carefully. And that's my goal is to use those types of numbers now that we have them and go to politicians and lawmakers and be like, listen, we're watching you. This is what we care about. And we actually vote and pay attention. So I'm hoping this will be a really useful tool for that.
Don't forget your atheist voter shirt.
Exactly.
Yes, because Justin's really been pushing those. You're familiar with Justin, I'm sure. Oh, yeah, and he's all about his atheist voters. Show up, tell them, let them know that there's an atheist president. That's one of the good things I think. Again, this report has just been the survey has been so enlightening. I can understand why one of Randolph's first questions is, when are you going to do it again? You want to see a bookend to know how the metrics are changing over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
What was I going to say? One other thing we have in there is we sort of peppered at the end of the survey. We had 2 sort of open-ended questions that allow people to give out their own answers. And what I found amazing was about 1/3 of people that took the survey actually took the time to write out their sort of story of either coming to terms with being non-religious and revealing it to family and friends, or discrimination that they suffered, or a friend or family that suffered. And so that is a huge rate of response. If you know anything about surveys, usually about 5% or so of people take the time to fill out those sort of open-ended questions. We had 1/3, which really shows me how much our community really wants to get their story out. And we had originally hoped to make this survey between 5,000 and 10,000 people, and we passed 10,000 in the first 8 hours. Wow. So we actually were going to keep it open for a month. We had to cut it back to 2 weeks just because we had so many responses. So I don't know, there's a real interest in this, and we tried to include throughout the survey report like snippets of people's stories, what they wrote, so we can give flavor to what the sort of statistics we're giving.
Okay, I have a quick question for you from the chat. Kristen asks, you said to stay focused on America, and that makes sense, of course, but does American atheists collaborate with other secular countries at all to get an idea of how our laws work or how their laws work?
Yes, absolutely. We work with international humanists and a variety of different organizations. So we're very involved with those other groups, and we coordinate with them and talk. We're going to attend their conference this year. I'm not sure what's going on with that currently. It was supposed to be in Florida, so we'll see what happens with that. But yes, we're absolutely engaged. And our president actually went to a conference, and our other vice president, Debbie Goddard, went to a conference in Iceland this year to meet with all those other groups and strengthen our connections. So yes,
Wonderful.
we do.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've had Nick Fish on the show. He was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Nick's great. Yeah.
If ever your executive are here in British Columbia, please let me know. I'd be happy to meet with them and even open a bridge there, make it even wider.
Fantastic. I think Mike was going to say something.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say it's just so. It wasn't very surprising to me that a lot of us are voting and registered to vote, and I think that a lot of secular people really support voting and getting people to vote, especially young people, because I've been registering students on campus to vote, and there seems to be this feeling of, oh, my vote doesn't matter, why should I vote? But in reality, voting is the most important thing you can do right now, really, to give yourself that voice, especially as a secular person, to be able to vote and, be a part of our democracy. And, I just think that that's really something that should be highlighted and really expanded upon.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, do you guys have anything else you'd like to cover? Any more checks off the box? If you are finished, we can go ahead and wrap up the show. I just want to extend you an open offer to come back anytime you guys want to. I'll try to be. This was a little.
I do want to ask one thing. I'm wondering what you think the maybe 1, 2, or 3 important basic things people can do in promoting a certain attitude or an idea or some kind of thing that people can do in society to help to work against the stigmatization, to kind of reduce it and to make things better for people who don't believe in deities.
Sure. And I was going to ask, I was going to plug sort of 2 things you can do right on the Secular Survey website with regard to this report. One is we have an action, so you can send it to lawmakers. So you can send it to your state and federal lawmakers to make them aware of what discrimination and stigma looks like amongst non-religious people, and also make them aware that they have non-religious constituents. Like, that's one of the most important things we can do when lobbying and raising awareness is we exist. We exist. You have to recognize it. So
what's the website address for that so people can?
Sure, it's just www.secularsurvey.org/ACT. So that's right, and you can also access it just from the main Secular Survey page. And the other thing is, we're trying to raise awareness of this as much as possible, this survey, and get it out there. So we have sample tweets and shareables. So if you could do anything to raise awareness of it on social media, we'd really appreciate it. And if you want to take the time to tell your own sort of story at the same time, I think that's great as well. So that's another thing people can do to sort of raise awareness about this. But I think, to answer your broader question, I think the most important things a non-religious person can do are be visible and organize. Join organizations like American Atheists. Look for your local organization. Canadian Atheists, and if you're in Canada, of course. So
Thank you very much.
Those are the 2 most important things. So get plugged in and be visible to the extent you can. I mean, sometimes you don't want to, we're not here to put people's lives or jobs at risk, right? But at the same time, if you can, that's how we make change.
I just so you know, that was actually a thumbs up. I wasn't pointing at the flag. It just. But thank you very much. What do you think, Michael? Exactly the same question.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been writing my congressmen and state representatives. American Atheists has helped me a lot with that. Freedom from Religion Foundation also does a great job with that. The Secular Student Alliance is really pushing that. Some of my elected officials have actually responded to me, and they said "Oh, I had no idea what Project Blitz was. I didn't know this was happening." I'm just like, wow. Well, good thing I'm here, representing my, secular constituents and people in my community.
Does the drag event that you're involved in, does that have a website that people can take a look at as well? And then maybe Alice can talk about the websites that are important that people should look at.
I was actually going to do all that. I was going to close out the show and go, if you want to plug any of your sites, but I mean, if you want to go ahead, Richard or Randolph, go ahead. That's what I was going to do. Yeah, that's how I was going to close the show, is by thanking you, welcoming you back in case that's where we were whenever you did the thing. I was going to welcome you back in case you wanted to come back to the show. Allison, we'd love to have you back. Michael, we'd love to have you back and hear more about your individual cases and what you've got going on. And do you have anything you'd like to share? Oh, well, we've got your things. I will get links from you. Do you have anything else you'd like to have somebody go visit? Links to the ACT page, of course. Anything else?
Well, I would just say atheist.org, secularsurvey.org, and blitzwatch.org are the major things I talked about. So check those out. And if you want to find out what the laws and policies are in your state, it'd be atheist.org/states. And we have that other great report. I
always have American Atheist links in my descriptions for people to go check out their stuff. So yeah, well, and any ones I've missed for in that specific case, like I said, I need to go back and correct our descriptions for this. I'll go ahead and add those for you there to make sure we've got them all. I'll hit you up with an email, please. And you, Michael, anything you'd like to?
Definitely check out Allison's article. The article's covering discrimination against secular LGBT people, and these effects. It's definitely present, and definitely read up on those articles. I don't think Pride will be happening. Well, it might be happening this year. I don't know yet because of the coronavirus that's going on right now. But definitely check out SOU's Career Resource Center for more information if you'd like. I'm sure we'll be having another drag show in the next winter term. So
can you tell us what the website address is for people who are blind and can only hear?
Oh, yes. So it's at southernoregonuniversity.com. It's through the college's website. Pretty easy to find, I would say. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you. Randolph, do you have anything closing thing you'd like to add?
I think it was a wonderful chance to get to know both of you and hear about all of this, especially the survey. It's wonderful that these things are going on, and the efforts that American Atheists is making is something I admire and I think is really excellent. And I'm just so thrilled to meet both of you today.
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll just point out our website for Canadian Atheists is www.canadianatheists.ca. But I think, once again, I'd like our guests to get the last word on talking about their website. And maybe you can just tell your website address again, please.
Dude.
Oh, I've already said it so many times.
So many times. We're done. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll have the links. Obviously, I'll put the links down below. Thank you very much. I'd love to have you back on the show again. You guys have a great day. You were wonderful. Y'all take care.
You too.